the Industrial Revolution of the Mage Lord. Hey, fanfic family. So glad to see you here again to continue this incredible adventure. As always, kindly remember, this story is 100% fiction. So don't go looking for dimensional portals in your closet. All rights to this fantastic novel belong to the original author. We're just your humble narrators of epic tales. Are you enjoying the fanfic? Show it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and dropping us a like. And if you're impatient for more exclusive content, our Patreon is your happy place. Chapter 476 Return with a full load. The last frozen cage in the camouflage camp was triggered, collapsing after a panicked alien enemy stepped on it. Boss, all 3 traps have been triggered. These remaining guys, Tommy shook his head, feeling dizzy from the intense, rapid use of his bloodline talent. Land. Have the brothers quickly clean up the situation. We're leaving here and returning to base. Although the alien monsters that had landed from the ice cave were numerous, the 7 or 8 red light monsters were completely killed or wounded. The ones controlling the black water were no match for the suppressive firepower of dozens of bloodline warriors, coupled with precise aerial sniping. Soon, all of them were shot in the vitals and fell to the snow. The soldiers rose from their shelter in the snow pits and cautiously approached the bodies of the fallen enemies. They had been repeatedly warned not to attempt to damage the strange skin covering the bodies, lest it trigger the body's self-destruction and affect themselves. These skinned creatures look disgusting. What's inside those greasy shells? Why is their blood the same red as ours? They smell even more foul than the fell orcs. They're truly the monsters from the sea, the city lord said they were. As soon as the airship involved in the battle landed, Tommy hurried down and shouted, "Don't waste time. Pull the frozen cages out of the snow pit. Pick out a few relatively intact bodies in all the undamaged black water cans. We'll leave in half an hour." The deputy came forward and asked, "Captain, what should we do with the bodies we can't take with us and the supplies we're using to camouflage the camp?" Tommy glanced around the messy camp and curled his lips. "We can't leave any clues for the enemy to observe and study us. Push everything, including the bodies, into the collapsed ice cave. Toss the broken black water cans in 2, and burn them all." At dawn the next day, the Royal Guards, having been away for a day and a night, returned to the Ice Sea exploration base in 2 intact airships, while the ground team, using alchemical beasts to tow 3 massive, sealed metal barrels. They were surrounded by base personnel and soldiers, who gazed with curiosity and disbelief at the alien corpses strewn across the cargo sled. Is this the alien race from the sea? The enemy we'll face in the future? They look no different from us. They're not even as big as the half-orc soldiers in the army. They're nowhere near as strong as the evil orcs. Ugh. They stink. In this respect, they're stronger than the evil orcs. Don't be ridiculous, someone whispered. The ones in charge of the capture are the city lord's personal guards. They're all transcendents with awakened bloodline talents. Many have been seriously injured, and I heard some have even been killed. Really? I don't know what methods they used, but they must be very powerful. Even Captain Tommy fell victim to them. They were captured alive from those 3 iron cylinders. When the time comes, the spellcasters will naturally study and torture them thoroughly to reveal all their weapons and secrets. Harvey, who had rushed over after hearing the news, listened to the discussions and nodded with satisfaction. The mission was successfully accomplished. The soldiers at the base had witnessed a legendary terrifying alien enemy with their own eyes, but none of them showed fear, instead unconsciously exuding confidence. "Sir, this mission went quite smoothly," Tommy boasted to Harvey. "We've captured a higher-ranking target than the Blackwater monster. It must be something Mr. Duncan and his team haven't encountered before. You'll definitely be interested." A living alien monster was naturally more appealing than a dead one. More and more soldiers turned to watch the frozen red monster imprisoned in a metal cage. It was clear the freezing array was powerful. After the Magic Academy and Alchemy Laboratory personnel dismantled the cage, the 3 monsters, each in a different pose, remained frozen, lying helplessly on the experimental cart. Harvey frowned. "Strange. According to your description, these people don't even carry black water canisters, relying solely on that strange red light as their attack method. They seem far weaker than the black water monsters. Why do they need to be surrounded and protected?" Chris and Benoit, who had arrived upon receiving the notification, were already eager to give it a try. Rubbing their hands together, they chuckled. If the Blackwater monsters are compared to bloodline warriors, then these red light emitters might be the spellcasters within their tribe. Harvey rolled his eyes speechlessly and warned, When facing these alien enemies, remember not to assume our human ways of thinking and behavior. They are two completely different intelligent beings. At this point, they haven't even seen their true identities, let alone their lifestyle, life expectancy, ability evolution, promotion paths, and, most importantly, their reproduction methods. The red light monsters appear weaker than the black water monsters, with a relatively simple attack method. But why are they so few in number and seem to hold a higher status within the tribe? There must be a hidden truth to this, one that Harvey needs to personally investigate and decipher. Arturo, who arrived late, hurriedly came to Harvey and said before Chris could speak, "Sir, the Magic Academy has applied to take the lead in this living research against alien enemies. Of course, we will also arrange for someone to dissect the corpses. You know well that no one is better at dealing with corpses than the necromancer." Chris came to his senses and realized that the Magic Academy was actually competing with the alchemy laboratory for such an important research target. He jumped up and shouted, "I object. Such an important research task should naturally be handed over to our alchemy laboratory. You can take the corpses, but you can't let you waste the living bodies." When the demon experimental receptors and blood-strengthening potions were studied, it was Chris who led a group of alchemy apprentices to cooperate with Harvey. Now he naturally has reason to seize the initiative. Harvey, contrary to his usual behavior, waved his hand and decisively rejected the two people's fight, and said in a deep voice, "Don't fight. The research task against these alien races is extremely important. I want you to set up a joint research team immediately, and I will be the one to lead the team." Tommy was stunned for a moment and said in disbelief, "Sir, you plan to bring these monsters back to Spark City?" Harvey nodded and said, "Yes. Didn't you find those corpses, all those who were shot to death? After the skin on the surface of the body was damaged, the body wrapped inside quickly showed signs of collapse and shrinkage, which shows that they are extremely dependent on this strange skin for activities on land. The first problem you need to solve right now is how to ensure that these 3 captured living bodies are sent back to Spark City smoothly. This is not like transporting freshly caught sea fish. Before figuring out the other party's dehydration death or how the self-destruct system is triggered, any reckless operation may cause the living target to die unexpectedly, and it may be difficult to recapture it. This was only the first step. Next, Harvey planned to crack the other party's life support system and find a way to send them alive to the southern border, and to the Federation, to directly prove to them the credibility of the rumors about the impending attack of alien enemies. Chapter 477, Outsiders. Oh my goodness. Is this the train I've been hearing about? As soon as Dave stepped onto the dock at Grizzly Castle, he spotted a massive steel train, its locomotive billowing thick white smoke, slowly approaching from the embankment not far from the dock. Ever since the fighting in Golden City subsided, the newly established City Hall had been issuing numerous job postings and aggressively annexing the land and farmland of the nobility. The people of the former capital, already landless, sought a living. Those unwilling to leave their homes migrated to surrounding towns, while those with more courage and foresight accepted the City Hall's job offers and left their homes to seek a life in the wilderness. Dave was one of these migrant workers heading north. Compared to the others, who were filled with doubts and anxieties, he was more confident that coming to the north would provide him with a satisfying job. Benny, his childhood friend and fellow townsman, had even enlisted in the army in the wilderness, seemingly offering generous pay. His words were undoubtedly true. Of course, Dave, penniless, couldn't afford the travel expenses from Jinhu City to Grizzly Territory. To ride the City Hall's ironclad, unsailed ships for free, he needed to sign a contract in advance, agreeing to work assignments. Travel expenses and meals would be deducted from his first month's salary. Riding on an ironclad ship was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. The fleet, loaded with civilians, departed from the old capital and reached Fingagan City in just 3 days, a journey that previously took a week. After anchoring overnight at the docks, they continued north upstream. After the fleet passed through the Sancha River estuary and officially entered Grizzly Territory, the entire Ralph River suddenly became bustling. The vast majority of the vessels were strange iron vessels without sails. Chatting with the sailors on board, they learned that the ironclad ships came in both military and civilian varieties, all powered by magic, unaffected by wind and current. Even in the depths of winter, they could break through the frozen river with impunity. For a commoner like Dave, who had always lived near the capital, this was a novelty. It was truly remarkable. Something worthy of being created in the fiefdom of a mage lord. Its magic could be unleashed directly upon the common people without even passing through the hands of a distinguished spellcaster. And Dave, having previously worked as a porter at the docks of Jinhu City, knew all too well. The sheer volume of ships plying the streets indicated the staggering number of people and goods being transported. Even the peak summer months of trade in the old capital wouldn't have seen such a flourishing scene. It spoke volumes about the prosperity of this northern city nestled in the wasteland. The notices posted by the city hall in the old capital's streets and squares were likely no mere boasting to deceive the public, but rather the reality of the situation. A fellow tugged at Dave, who was standing dazed on the dock, and urged him, "Stop looking. Hurry and catch up with those city hall officials. They say that to reach Spark City, you have to take that strange, rumbling, smoke-belching vehicle we just saw. It seems, it's called a train." Dave rolled his eyes and said disdainfully, "I know it's called a train. I've heard sailors from the north mention it many times before I got here." But what he still couldn't understand was, how this behemoth, seemingly made up of several iron boxes connected together and weighing tens of thousands of pounds, would carry them over the towering Divine Spine Mountains and ultimately reach Spark City in the north. It wasn't until he was urged and herded by City Hall officials, and squeezed into a crowded line to board the train, that the answer to this question became clear. Oh my God. They actually dug through the Divine Spine Mountains and built such a deep mountain tunnel for this train to pass through. Although the train cars were fully enclosed, they still had several windows covered with tarpaulins next to the 2 rows of seats to block the wind. As the front of the train rumbled into the dark mountain, carrying several cars, Dave felt his vision go black. Then, a few bright white lights slowly illuminated on the roof of the car. He carefully lifted a corner of the tarpaulin and heard the wind whistling outside. In the faint light, he could vaguely see the smooth mountain wall rapidly receding. This train was truly traveling deep within the Divine Spine Mountains. This was the North-South Express that those officials had talked about, which could take them from the southern border to the wilderness in just half a day. Like the others experiencing this for the first time, Dave leaned against the window, his mouth gaping in silence. The sight of a sailless ironclad ship was incredible enough, but they hadn't expected a mountain-climbing train to be even more miraculous. The slight discomfort caused by the train's loud noise and constant vibrations pales in comparison to the miraculous experience. Accepting the Royal City Hall's recruitment and seeking a life in the wilderness was the wisest decision, Dave thought to himself. Even if I return home, at least I can be considered a worldly wise person. Amidst the heated discussion within the packed carriage, the iron door at the end suddenly swung open, and a man in a dark blue uniform, claiming to be a conductor, entered, pushing a light 2-wheeled cart. "Make way. Pull your feet back. Watch out for the wheels. Don't stick your head or hands out of the window." He pushed the cart skillfully while shouting to make way, his voice completely drowning out the noise of the moving train. Motion sickness medicine. Does anyone need motion sickness medicine? Take it orally and it works immediately. Selling medicine on the train? Dave was stunned for a moment, then turned around and saw the little sister brought by his fellow trainee, curled up in the corner of the carriage with a blue face. She has been like this since she boarded the ship in the royal capital. She can't eat and vomits from time to time. It is obvious that she is not acclimatized to the climate here, and perhaps she has unfortunately contracted malaria. He and his fellow villager looked at each other, and at the same time called out to the man in blue uniform, "Wait! Doctor! We want to buy medicine." The conductor turned around in confusion and muttered, "I'm not a doctor. Do you need motion sickness medicine? There are 10 pills in a pack for 2 gold yuan. 1 pill is enough for each time you feel motion sickness." Dave said hesitantly, "Please help me take a look at this child's symptoms." "Is it the motion sickness you mentioned?" The conductor frowned and moved closer. He briefly checked the listless child and shook his head. "I'm really not a doctor. I can't tell you what's wrong with this child. You have to go to the medical hospital after we get to the station." He thought for a moment, then pulled an unsealed package of motion sickness pills from his jacket pocket, took out a pill, and handed it to Dave. "Maybe it's motion sickness. Let her take this and see if it works." The fellow villager quickly took the pill and, with some coaxing, stuffed it into the child's mouth. After waiting for a moment, he saw that the little girl's complexion had indeed gradually improved, and her spirits had become much better. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Dave thanked him repeatedly. He and the fellow villager pulled out the few poorly minted, slightly blackened silver coins from their pockets and said hesitantly, I wonder how much this medicine costs." The conductor curled his lips, waved his hand, turned around, and pushed the cart away. "No, it's medicine I prepared for myself. Besides, your currency doesn't circulate here. Remember to exchange it for gold yuan when you get to Spark City. You outsiders are really." Chapter 478 Entering the City. The train clanked slowly into the central station. With a sharp squeak of brakes, Dave and his fellow townsman, holding his sister's hand, stumbled off amidst the throng of people. A whistle blared from the massive metal train behind them, as if offering a warm welcome to these newly arrived strangers. Is this Spark City?" The newly disembarked crowd was stunned by the bustling scene before them. None of them were country bumpkins from the remote countryside. After all, they were from the old capital's environs. Before arriving in Spark City, their assumptions had largely been based on the prosperity of Golden Radiance City. Yet, they still underestimated this legendary wasteland city. The central station where the trains docked was vast, and the number of people coming and going surpassed even the old capital's busiest docks. In addition to the train they were on, 2 other tracks extended in other directions, indicating that the train's route wasn't limited to Grizzly Castle and Spark City. The spacious platform was clearly divided into 2 sides, one for passengers boarding and disembarking, the other filled with loading and unloading carts and numerous bizarre metal contraptions, some resembling oxen and draft horses, others sporting multiple mechanical legs. "Look, those mechanical creatures move. They can even help pull cargo. Oh my god, are they alive? They look like they were made of iron." Dave stood on tiptoe, trying to rise above the crowd to get a better look at the moving metal monsters. Hearing this, he heard the loud shout of the leading municipal official. "All new immigrants to the old capital, come to me. I'll be letting you through identity verification and registration. Do not leave the group without permission. If you leave the central station without proof of identity, you'll be arrested by the patrol within half an hour." Patrol? They'll be rounding up undocumented refugees in the city. That's probably similar to the Royal Capital's city defense patrols. Don't dare offend them, and you'll have to be careful to avoid them from now on. Dave thought to himself, but his steps involuntarily followed the large group into the station hall. Once inside, he discovered dozens of small cabin-like rooms on one side of the hall. A group of city officials in dark blue uniforms approached, ordering them to form a long line and enter the small rooms to complete identity verification and registration. Dave looked at the line that stretched behind him. At a glance, it looked like there were more than 1,000 people. A single recruitment drive could accommodate such a large number of refugees. Even the soup kitchens held at the Cathedral of Glory during the winter famine around the royal capital pale in comparison. The fellow villager clutched his sister's hand tightly and whispered nervously, "Dave, what are these small rooms and checkpoints for? Do they collect a city entrance tax?" A uniformed official passing by overheard this and enthusiastically explained, "There's no such thing as a city entrance tax in Spark City, let alone a head tax. In fact, there's no overt taxation. Only once you find a job will the city hall deduct a tiny amount from your salary as tax." Wasn't this the usual extortion tactics used by the city guards against outsiders? It was a genuine identity verification and registration process. Dave quickly winked at his fellow villager, and he, relieved, put the purse he had clenched in his arms back into his arms. A middle-aged official, clearly of higher rank, approached and chuckled. "Don't worry, everyone. The rest is a normal registration process for entering the city. As long as you abide by the laws of the North, no one will dare extort a single cent from you." Indeed, as he'd predicted, when Dave's turn arrived, the officer in the small room checking his identity, though unusually tired, remained gentle. After briefly asking about his hometown, surname, and past experiences, he stamped a blank card, the size of a half-palm. Without further ado, he pricked his finger and smeared a drop of blood on the card. "This is your temporary ID. Keep it with you and don't lose it. If you do lose it, you must immediately go to the City Hall Identity Registration Office to apply for a replacement that same day. Otherwise, a patrol officer might lead to you being taken to the police station and locked up for days." Another patrol officer. Dave's heart tightened, and he clutched the card tightly, intending to put it in his inner pocket. By the time he emerged from the cubicle, many people, who had also received temporary ID cards, were slowly gathering towards the other end of the hall. A blue-clad official, standing on a makeshift platform, was shouting something through a megaphone. "With your temporary ID cards, you can come with me to the temporary shelter outside the east gate. Someone will arrange temporary housing for you. Many people stared in disbelief and surprise. Accommodation? Yes. Free housing? Yes, that's right. Everything we promised you when we recruited you stands. Free housing will be provided until you've officially started for a month, and likewise, free food will be provided until you receive your first paycheck. The job posting issued by Jinhu City Hall wasn't just a trick to lure them to the North Territory, it was all real. Dave was delighted, and huddled with his fellow townsmen, concluding, "Great. I was thinking we'd just find a place to stay under a bridge or street tonight, and then look for jobs tomorrow. So, there really are jobs waiting for us? I hear the pay is pretty good, too." The gathered migrants from the southern border instantly shook off the fatigue and confusion of their arduous journey. They excitedly surrounded the city officials, demanding information about their future plans. After a group of migrant workers from the capital had completed their identity registration, they, led by a dozen blue-clad officials, formed a thin line and slowly made their way outside the central station. The temporary shelter, like the central station, was located outside the east gate of Spark City, so it wasn't technically part of the city. But upon arriving at the temporary shelter, Dave and the others were once again stunned by the sight. It wasn't the simple, run-down shelter shacks they'd expected, but rather long rows of two-story gray buildings, densely packed against the city walls. They even had neatly organized drainage ditches in front of the houses, and even the crisscrossing paths were paved with compacted cobblestones. They looked nothing like the houses of the wealthy families in the inner city of the capital. The only criticism was, perhaps, the monotonous colors and lack of elaborate design. "Brother Dave, can we really live in a house like this?" a fellow villager's younger sister asked cautiously, tugging timidly at Dave's shirt. Before Dave could reply, a booming voice boomed over the nearby loudspeaker. "The corresponding house number is marked on the back of your temporary ID. If you can't read, you can find any city hall official and ask for help. I'll come back tomorrow morning to inform everyone to go to the city to sign their employment contracts." The scene was bustling, and almost everyone could smell the faint aroma of food. At the intersection of the nearby streets stood a semi-open shop with a large wooden sign hanging from the top. Some barely literate outsiders squinted their eyes and muttered unconsciously, "Temporary, shelter, relief, canteen." If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 479 Living Test. The alien captives captured at the IC exploration base were quickly and safely transported to Spark City via a teleportation array. To ensure the safety of the upcoming series of live experiments, Harvey emptied the castle's underground laboratory, reserving a large area for the experiments. After all, after absorbing the ancient magic core, he had gained the unique ability to control the energy-absorbing beetles in the underground mines, capable of commanding hundreds of thousands of these massive magical insects to suppress most experimental accidents. The Dean of the Academy of Magic, the head of the experimental team, and the two heads of the alchemy laboratory were almost all present. The head of the medical department, Igno, also abandoned his potion research and hurried to the scene. Even if they could not personally participate in the experiments, most of the Spark City officials did not want to miss the opportunity to observe the enemy up close. Because the captured alien captives were not the expected Blackwater monsters, but a completely new species that lacked the Blackwater weapon tanks and simply controlled the strange red light attacks, Harvey and his team had to make temporary adjustments to their experimental preparations. The live captives were kept frozen throughout the process, then injected with a large dose of anesthetic for safety by Igno. Their limbs and necks were securely bound to the laboratory table with shackles made of solid, shimmering copper. When Harvey arrived at the lab, Igno, accompanied by two hybrid elf apprentices, were carefully conducting the most basic tests. This was Harvey's first close encounter with the strange creatures described. They possess limbs, a torso, and a head like humans, but their builds were noticeably more slender, and their joints appeared slightly swollen and twisted, suggesting a greater range of motion. No wonder they possessed formidable melee abilities comparable to those of bloodline warriors. The coarse, seamless skin that enveloped the entire body was Harvey's primary concern. Not only did it resist most magical attacks, even ordinary swords and axes proved difficult to penetrate. Only kinetic weapons like magic gun bullets, with their exceptionally high speed and penetrating power, could penetrate it. He personally examined the dozen or so bodies recovered, confirming they had indeed died from punctures in vital areas like the head and chest. However, the damage to the skin quickly exposed the flesh and blood within, turning it into putrid, foul-smelling black pus that flowed from the bullet holes. Hearing that the guards had witnessed a spurt of bright red flesh after piercing the skin during a sting operation, they could at least rest assured that the creatures were carbon-based creatures like themselves. "Look, sir. Those crimson sacs on either side of the head are clearly part of their bodies, not attached to the skin." Although Egno had seen plenty in a lair, this was his first time handling such a living alien, and his voice trembled with excitement. Although sealed by the freezing spell, these two sacs still have a slow rhythmic vibration. "I suspect this is the organ they use for breathing, similar to our lungs." Harvey raised his hand and gently pressed on the chest of the frozen creature. After feeling it for a while, he shook his head and said, "It can't be called lungs. These are probably gills." Chris came up and said in surprise, "Gills? Are they a variant of the sea people?" Arturo shook his head and said, "We have dealt with the sea people. The sea people are a humanoid race like the orcs. Their body structure is not much different from ours. At most, because they have been active in the sea all year round, they have some web feet in the gaps between their hands and feet to facilitate paddling. The sea people live on islands and reefs, but they don't have gills." Harvey turned to Egno and asked, "Have you noticed that their body temperature is very low?" Egno nodded, pointed to the notebook in his hand, and said in a deep voice, "Indeed, although it is not clear whether it is because the skin blocks the body temperature, the body surface is cold to the touch, almost like a cold-blooded animal." For a moment, Harvey could only think of certain ancient amphibians like monitor lizards. Their low body temperature indicates a slow metabolism, which, in a sense, indicates their exceptional adaptability to their environment. This is likely one of the main reasons they can adapt to both the frozen deep sea and the terrestrial amphibians. Similarly, freezing them won't kill them completely. At most, it can only temporarily put them into slumber. Chris rubbed his hands, exchanged a glance with Arturo, and said excitedly, "Observation alone won't yield any useful answers. My lord, shall we proceed with the dissection?" Egno grabbed him and shook his head vigorously. "Caution! Once the shell is broken, the recipients will quickly die if exposed to air, and the internal shell will decay as well. We only have 3 living specimens. How do they communicate?" Harvey's mind raced with thoughts, and he suddenly turned to look at his captain of the guard. "These creatures are like dumb creatures. Whether they move or fight, they make no sound. We can't even tell if they have language," Tommy replied with a frown. "I'm afraid we'll need to thaw it and slowly awaken it," Harvey said slowly. The guards immediately brought in dozens of massive steel shields and erected them around the experimental table, primarily to separate Harvey from the test subject. Everyone present was unanimous in their opposition to Harvey personally participating in the experiment. Leaving the task of awakening the subject to Arturo and Isdelin, the 2 alchemical life forms, was the clearest option. Harvey reluctantly complied, surrounded by the guards holding the massive shields, and led them away from the experimental area. He also channeled some of his mental energy to slowly approach the experimental alchemical beast, using its vision to closely observe the subject's reactions. After clearing the area, Harvey commanded from afar, "Begin." "Yes." The 2 alchemical life forms nodded simultaneously. They took the awakening potion provided by Egno and gently injected it into the crimson sac behind the ear, the only part of the body exposed outside the skin, allowing for injection without piercing the skin. Less than 10 minutes later, everyone noticed the previously deflated sacs and the target's receptors suddenly swelled. Then, the target seemed to fully awaken, his body shifting from uncontrollable tremors to violent struggles, so powerful that they rattled the entire lab table. He's still flesh and blood. Without mana to harness, he can't escape the shackles of the luminous copper. Before Arturo could finish his words, the target's dark, rough body suddenly thrashed. Countless tiny, earthworm-like red lights emerged from its shell, twisting and converging, transforming into a bolt of red lightning as thick as an arm, which blasted towards the laboratory ceiling. The solid obsidian ceiling was rock solid. The massive lightning strike sent only a few wisps of dust flying, but the exploding plasma fell back to the ground, striking the 3 alchemical beings standing by the lab table, including the humanoid alchemical beast controlled by Harvey. The magical inscriptions on the 3 men suddenly lit up, and their bodies began to tremble uncontrollably. Arturo, the closest, stumbled and fell heavily to the ground. Isdelin, holding onto Harvey's alchemic beast, retreated several steps before regaining his balance. "How's Dean Arturo?" everyone cried out in alarm. As Dallin hurried forward to check, and with a sigh of relief, he turned back and said, "It's fine. It seems to have been hit by some unknown energy flow in its power core. It's simply overheated and in hibernation." Chapter 480 Autopsy Report. Several royal guards rushed forward and painstakingly dragged Arturo, struck by the red lightning, to the energy-gathering array. They skillfully connected a charging line to it, waiting several minutes before the unfortunate dean of the Academy of Magical Sciences slowly regained consciousness. "Such a powerful energy shock," Arturo muttered awkwardly as he stood up. "This lightning-like energy attack is a huge threat to flesh and blood soldiers, but it's useless against alchemical bodies crafted from enchanted metal. You've left quite a few scars, though." Harvey stepped forward and pointed at the scratches and mottled marks on Arturo and Asdalin's alchemical bodies. Chris boldly stepped forward from behind the steel shield, wondering, this creature struggled for ages, only to come up with this one attack. "Isn't it rather weak?" Everyone quickly turned their attention back to the living alien creature strapped to the experimental table. Its struggle seemed to have weakened considerably, and the rapidly swelling sacs beside its ears had shrunk again, appearing even weaker than when frozen. "Releasing the red lightning will drain its vitality, or some other energy it relies on," as Dallin speculated. Harvey nodded in agreement. "That's probably the case. If the red lightning could be released without restraint, they wouldn't have been captured alive." In comparison, the alien creatures, who excelled in close combat and possessed terrifying liquid weapons like black water, were clearly more powerful. Why did these red lightning creatures appear to possess a higher status? Chris obviously had the same idea as Harvey. He frowned and muttered to himself, if the Blackwater people are compared to bloodline warriors, and the red light people are compared to spellcasters, an idea suddenly flashed through Harvey's mind, and he blurted out, "Unless the liquid weapons that the Blackwater people rely on can only be produced by these spellcaster-like red light people, then everything makes sense." He immediately instructed his apprentices to bring over the Blackwater weapon canisters they had brought back, handing them over to Chris and Benoit, who were more skilled in material testing. They cleared a lab bench and began extracting and testing on the spot. "It's not an extract of magical minerals, nor does it contain any magical plant ingredients. It doesn't even contain any active substances. How did those Blackwater people manipulate it to transform into crystal weapons at will? No. This liquid reacts to magic," Benoit suddenly shouted excitedly, calling everyone to gather around. They watched as he slowly drew a drop of the viscous black liquid from the canister over the liquid magic energy constantly stored in the laboratory. Almost instantly, the black liquid, like iron meeting a magnet, was drawn towards the liquid magic energy, rapidly flowing. Finally, it blended smoothly into the liquid magic energy, its color gradually fading until it completely merged with the clear magic energy. "I think I know how the exploration team was tracked and monitored by those aliens," Harvey patted Benoit on the shoulder, his understanding suddenly dawning. "This black water, capable of transforming into various solid crystal weapons, possesses a natural attraction to demons. The more intense the surge of magical power, the more it dazzles them in the darkness, like a light attracting moths. Master, look! This thing is dying." Igno, who had been examining the experimental receptors, shouted. Harvey hurried forward to investigate and found that the red light monster had completely ceased struggling. The crimson sac behind its ear had shriveled into a withered ball of flesh, even the faintest twitch no longer present. The energy they used to unleash their red light attacks wasn't inherently their own, but required repeated replenishment, like a recharge. Once depleted from overload, their life would be lost. Harvey breathed a sigh of relief upon reaching this conclusion. "Chris, Igno, Benoit, and Arturo, conduct the autopsy of the death receptors." He had barely finished speaking when Chris, already impatient, leapt ahead of Arturo and took the lead position at the lab table, his face radiating joy. The alien outposts dispatched from the fabled center of the continent to the frozen seas and frozen lands were clearly a low-level force of pathfinders, not much different from Harvey's ordinary soldiers of civilian origin. As the basic fighting force of the same ethnic group, these aliens lacked weapons technology and capabilities far superior to their own. Whether it was the cold-blooded Blackwater or the long-range red lightning, both were effectively resisted by the relatively sturdy shields. Furthermore, the red lightning was even less powerful than a large-caliber sniper magic rifle, which could easily penetrate a steel shield at the same range, possessing significantly greater penetrating power. If the two armies were to face off, within 1,000 meters, Harvey felt that his magically enhanced thermal weapons would be more than enough to shatter these alien enemies, cloaked in magical armor. The enemy's red lightning was clearly no match for the 1,000-meter range magical artillery. Black crystal spikes and spears, meanwhile, would only work within rifle and machine gun range, by which time they would be ripped to shreds by the barrage of bullets. With this in mind, Harvey decided to immediately expand the military factory and dramatically increase the production of magical ammunition. With enough firepower, all unknown fears would be overcome. The laboratory beneath the castle burned brightly throughout the night. At dawn, Harvey, still unable to sleep, received the lab report. This fresh autopsy report also astonished him. The liquid weapons so deftly manipulated by the Blackwater people were likely made from the blood of the Red Light people. How is this possible? Harvey opened his mouth slightly, looking at Chris and others at the dining table who were wolfing down food to replenish their energy after staying up late. Drawing blood to use as a weapon? Is this tribe crazy? As Dallin and Arturo, who did not need to eat, sat aside and patiently explained to Harvey, "We also find it incredible, but the results of the autopsy are infinitely close to this answer. They are indeed flesh and blood, but they have two sets of blood circulation systems in their bodies. One set stores the same bright red body fluids as us humans, and the other set is full of sticky black water." Harvey felt a little dizzy. The amphibious aliens he imagined were not this kind of amphibious form that completely violated common sense and did not give evolution any face. It's a pity these guys don't have language. Otherwise, I really want to find a way to pry open their mouths and learn from them how their tribe reproduces and evolves. Chris, with his mouth full of butter-fried eggs, muttered without caring about his image. As Dallin shook his head in denial, it's impossible for intelligent creatures not to have evolved writing and language. I don't think they communicate using the common sense of speech, perhaps similar to how birds, beasts, fish, or even insects communicate, Benoit said bewilderedly, but they must make sounds. Look, from beginning to end, we cut it open, and it's as quiet as a mute. Even a mute can still howl. Chapter 481 Demon Lizard Man. It took less than a day to capture the 3 living aliens, each of which was then consumed by the numerous researchers in the alchemy laboratory and the Academy of Magic. Even the dissected corpses were brought back to the Academy by the eager necromancers, joining the returned Blackwater alien corpses to contribute to the traditional research of the Undead faction. Within half a week, in-depth research reports, a palm's thickness, were pouring onto Harvey's desk. The aliens, officially known as the Demon Lizardmen, temporarily divided the captured 2 distinct combat types into Red Lizardmen and Black Lizardmen, distinguishing them by the creators and masters of the Blackwater weapons. Furthermore, the lab report handed to Harvey after the autopsy also noted that while the lizardmen's physique resembled humans, the skeletal muscles beneath their skin were significantly stronger than those of ordinary humans. While the flesh within would quickly decay and dissolve if the outer skin were damaged, the soft texture of the skin alone provided adequate protection against magical attacks. However, melee attacks from sharp weapons would still affect the internal body, requiring the tribe's strong physical endowment to counteract them. Furthermore, the lizardmen possessed not only 2 distinct circulatory systems but also distinct digestive and respiratory systems from those of other intelligent species. Their pouch-like organs, resembling stomachs, could not extract any undigested food, leaving only a small amount of highly concentrated salt crystals. This led Harvey to strongly suspect that not only could they survive for extended periods in the ocean, but their sustenance was likely closely tied to the freezing cold. Perhaps they didn't rely solely on preying on aquatic fish. A diet of minerals and plants was also highly likely. What surprised Harvey was that the Alchemy Laboratory and the Academy of Magical Sciences were unable to successfully decipher the origin of the strange skin covering the body of the lizard man. After extensive testing, we know that this skin is extremely resistant to magic and can perfectly isolate air and moisture. The flames will at most dry out its surface, but it won't reduce it to ash. We highly suspect it's the skin of some powerful magical creature that exists in the deep sea, and hasn't yet been discovered. Harvey closed the lab report and pinched his brow with a headache. Since we can't communicate with the living captives, we can only gather this intelligence. Seeing this, Chris, who was reporting seriously, cautiously probed, "Sir, there are still 2 living people." Harvey immediately raised his head and interrupted, "Leave at least one alive and find a way to extend the freezing time. I want to send it to Lay." Arturo and Reiner couldn't sit still anymore. They stood up and tried to dissuade him. "Sir, Such precious alien living beings and intelligence information, are you going to give them to the Federation for nothing? We spent countless efforts to obtain them. No problem, I'll make them pay a satisfactory price. Harvey waved his hand. Although our intention is to completely tie the Federation to our side, they must pay the full price. Since Harvey explicitly stated that he wanted to leave one survivor, that meant that the remaining living alien immediately became a vital resource, fiercely contested by several research groups in Spark City. The Academy of Magical Sciences, composed of necromancers who had switched spellcasting affiliations, naturally valued the distinctly human forms beneath the lizard folk's veneer. The Alchemy Laboratory, traditionally focused on weapons development, was interested in the veneer's immunity to magic and impervious to water and fire. As for the potion research team at the Territory Hospital, they accepted every opportunity, eager to drain every last drop of fluid from the deceased experimental subject. However, upon awakening from their frozen state, the lizardmen would immediately engage in unstoppable self-destructive behavior, rendering Arslan, who sought to study their culture and spirituality, helpless. Without communication, he had no way of knowing their exact location, their population size, or even how they reproduced or why they chose to invade human territory southward. Unfortunately, prolonged freezing couldn't prolong the lizardmen's life indefinitely. After all, like humans, they were carbon-based organisms that relied on food for energy. Prolonged deprivation of food, even with a severely slowed metabolism, would inevitably lead to slow, irreversible death. Taking advantage of the last remaining living specimen's relative freshness and to avoid internal strife among his various research departments, Harvey launched another joint research project, testing the lizardmen's vulnerability to attacks other than magical weapons. It is known that our magical guns and artillery can cause fatal damage to them. With a skin on, they are immune to magic and ordinary swords, but that is far from enough. Let's try biological weapons such as poison potions and infectious plagues. Faced with such a strange and powerful but completely unfamiliar alien enemy, Harvey naturally thought of inhumane biological weapons in addition to the firepower brought by thermal weapons. After all, with his ability, it is unlikely that he can play a card as powerful as a nuclear bomb. If he wants to kill the enemy on a large scale, he can also go the way of metaphysical plague with added magical effects. Just as everyone was about to leave, he slapped his forehead, a sudden thought coming to his mind. He hurriedly instructed, I suddenly remembered that there seemed to be several low-ranking priests imprisoned in the prison. As Dallin paused for a moment, puzzled, a few cowardly charlatans who abandoned their faith out of fear and were spared the gallows by confessing the church's crimes. Living is a waste of food. The police are planning to send them to lifelong hard labor in the forests during the autumn harvest. Harvey nodded and said seriously, take them out of the prison and let them try their magic. Arturo and Chris looked puzzled, and asked in unison, magic? The other party was immune to magic. If they couldn't resist a divine attack, wouldn't that be a blatant slap in the face of all spellcasters? Could the divine power that the Radiant cult touted truly surpass the infinite magic that symbolized ultimate truth and wisdom? Harvey glanced at the crowd's quizzical expressions, immediately understanding their thoughts. He smiled and explained, it's not about determining the superiority of magic or divine arts, but rather clarifying another historical question that has plagued all spellcasters. If humanity was the loser of ancient struggle, driven from the continent's center to the southern border, then these demon lizardmen were likely the primary culprits behind humanity's initial defeat. Their weapons and protective measures are naturally highly targeted at countering humanity's age-old magic. But the Radiant cult was founded only after humanity established itself in the southern border. If their divine arts truly derive from the claimed divine power, then the demon lizardmen's protective shells cannot fully withstand their attacks. Unless their divine arts also originate from magic. Then the deity they worship and believe in, could it be a being who, since ancient times, has ascended to legendary status, a magical demigod who has completely transcended the plane of life? Chapter 482, Living in the North is not easy. Outside the east gate of Spark City, in the temporary shelter area, the sun's last remaining rays lingered on the mountain tops, tinging the towering city walls and the turbulent glacial river in the distance with a brilliant golden glow. The several relief canteens set up at intersections in the temporary shelter area punctually wafted the enticing aroma of food. It's oatmeal, but it definitely has meat in it. I can smell it, Dave, after a long day of toil, swallowed hard. Fellow villagers who had rushed back to the shelter before him were already standing in the food line. Seeing Dave's late arrival, they jumped up and waved vigorously. Dave? Dave? Come on, he hunched his neck and squeezed to the front. Although cutting in line this way might anger the crowd, the only response was a few muttered insults and a shove, not a fight. No matter how far down the line, the soup kitchen ensured everyone received a sufficient amount of food. Those distributing the meals even gave extra portions to those able-bodied and hardy laborers. Since everyone was well-fed, there was no need for violence. Throughout the city and the internment zone, the half-human, half-mechanical monsters, the terrifying beings known as the Security Patrol, were a constant sight. Dave had witnessed a few days earlier, a man from Fingigan City, who had arrived a week after their shift, attempted to harass a young refugee from Porto Montenegro after work. Before the girl's screams had died down, the patrolman, bursting from the street corner, swung his terrifying metal arm, wrestling the hapless, lustful man to the ground. Dave, watching from across the street, could hear the horrifying sound of his arm breaking. His arm was likely completely broken. Yes, innocent harassment and molestation, even for lowly refugees, is a crime punishable by detention in Spark City. If caught red-handed, a willing partner might only receive a broken arm. But if someone commits the serious crime of rape, they risk a lifetime of living in the darkness of the mines. Spark City's laws are said to be impartial, regardless of status. From the mayor to the city hall manager, down to the newly arrived refugees, anyone who violates local laws will be brought before the police and brought to the Ministry of Justice for trial. The verdict is regularly displayed in the large square in front of the city hall as a warning and comfort to the city's citizens. Although Dave was an illiterate peasant, he knew that robbery, murder, theft, and rape were serious crimes that must never be committed. Furthermore, the city strictly prohibited openly promoting religious beliefs. He either couldn't understand or memorize the numerous laws and regulations. To avoid inadvertently breaking the law due to ignorance, he had maintained a daily routine since receiving his contract, commuting only between the factory and the internment area outside the East Gate, never wandering around the city. He even hesitated to contact his childhood friend, Benny, who served in the Northern Army, for fear of being labeled a spy if he trespassed on the barracks looking for him. His cautious lifestyle was driven not only by his long-standing cautious nature, but also by the incredibly generous salary offered by his current job. Dave still remembered the first day he was led into the city, to a sprawling workshop complex not far from the East Gate, where he nervously awaited the so-called interview with the city officials. Rejected several times due to illiteracy and short stature, he was practically despairing. But then, upon arriving at a workshop called the Vegetable Canning Factory, he was fortunately chosen by the manager. The work wasn't the hard labor he'd imagined. Instead, he stood beside a long, self-propelled metal track, applying red, green, and yellow labels to cans the size of sand bowls. He worked for 2 hours, then he had a quarter-hour break, then switched to another track and continued for 2 hours. Half the morning's work was complete, followed by an incredible 1-hour lunch break. In the afternoon, he could sit on a high chair and continue the same labeling routine. It was like lying around and getting paid for nothing. What's more, the contract clearly stated a monthly salary of 60 gold yuan. After deducting travel expenses, food, and lodging, he'd still receive at least 50 gold yuan. Dave wasn't sure about the exchange rate between gold coins and ordinary silver and copper coins, so a kind local worker took him to the convenience market not far from the factory after work. The rye bread, a staple of the lower classes in the southern border, was completely unavailable at the market. The higher quality barley bread could be had for 2 pounds for a gold dollar, enough to fill the stomachs of a heavy laborer who worked the docks all day carrying heavy bags. Unbelievably, pork cost $1.50, and bacon 2 pieces. Fresh meats of higher quality and flavor, like chicken, duck, beef, and mutton, were mostly under $5. Fish was especially cheap due to the proximity to the glacial river. It's said that in the depths of winter, when salmon are in season, fresh live fish at the convenience market are practically sold for half a dollar or given away. Even the seemingly bustling processed food stores, which seemed incredibly busy, had Dave taken a tour. The workers kindly told him that even the most expensive southern seafood, wild game, local craft wines, and processed foods infused with rare spices, with his salary, he could afford to indulge in one item each month. There was no need to skimp. This was enough to leave Dave, accustomed to a life of rye bread in summer and autumn and bran cakes in winter and spring, mouth-watering with astonishment. Just by half standing and half sitting in the workshop labeling cans for a month, he could actually live the life of an ordinary middle-class resident in the capital. If it weren't for the long journey to get here, he would have thought he was suffering from hysteria. The workers seemed accustomed to seeing this bumpkin from the southern region. The more Dave was surprised and shocked, the higher the corners of their mouths curled, as if they were extremely pleased and enjoying Dave's attitude and reaction. Before parting, a co-worker patted Dave's shoulder, completely immersed in joy, and said gently, "Eating is the first priority, but if you don't want to live outside the city forever, in a place less than 10 square meters with 6 people squeezing into hard bunk beds, you must work hard and strive to get a permanent job as soon as possible. Once you get a formal job contract, you can go to City Hall and apply to move into the city." The co-worker's words, like the devil's whisper of temptation, echoed in Dave's ears for a long time. The worst living conditions in the city are at least a 2-bedroom bungalow, 20 to 30 square meters in size, with a bedroom, living room, bathroom, and kitchenette. You only need to pay less than half your salary in rent, and you can live there happily. Chapter 483 Archives Management Talent. Filled with hope and joy, Dave diligently spent his first month in the canning workshop in the north. As he received the envelope containing his salary from his supervisor, tears welled up in his eyes. Over the past month, his life had undergone a profound transformation. No longer did he have to huddle in the dilapidated shanties of the old capital's lower city, constantly worrying about food. Although he couldn't recognize the characters on the thin banknotes, the amount was correct. 60 gold yuan in salary, 6 gold yuan notes in total. There was no blatant exploitation, covert deductions, or malicious delays. Even the pay was paid exactly as promised in the contract. He had truly taken the first step towards the wonderful life he had imagined. The free shelter apartment was only for a month's stay. After all, more civilians were expected to pour into Spark City. Housing was currently tight not only in the East Gate shelter area but also in the new one at the Southwest Gate. Next, he would take his supervisor's signed certificate of officialization and go to City Hall to apply for a city residency permit. Meanwhile, with the help of the Housing and Rental Management Department, he could rent a small, 1-bedroom apartment for around 15 gold yuan. His monthly salary was 60 gold yuan, with additional stipends for overtime. After rent and food expenses, he could save at least 30 gold yuan a month. If all went well, he could save enough for a down payment on the cheapest 1-bedroom apartment in a year. Dave had been told about this installment home purchase policy for official residents by a local worker who had always taken such good care of him. From the moment he learned about it, his heart was filled with a burning desire. He desperately wanted a place of his own. With trepidation and excitement, Dave knocked on the door of the workshop supervisor's office and cautiously requested a half-day's leave the next day so he could go to City Hall to apply for his city residency permit. The supervisor, a slightly plump, middle-aged local, smiled as he pulled a long-prepared note from under his desk. He then slipped it into an envelope along with a short, inscribed page and handed it to Dave. "Give this letter of recommendation and your permit to the City Hall official who will be receiving you tomorrow," the supervisor said, handing the envelope to Dave. He added, "Once you've obtained your entry permit and rental housing, don't forget to apply for nighttime literacy school." Dave, literacy is a skill everyone in Spark City should master. Dave subconsciously took the envelope and nodded, somewhat bewilderedly. "Thank you, supervisor. I'll definitely make it to literacy school on time, but what's the recommendation?" The supervisor blinked mysteriously and chuckled. "Of course, it's a review of your performance during this month's internship." Rarely wandering the city, the illiterate Dave rose early the next morning and, after asking around, was directed to the City Hall gates by kind locals. Entering the lobby, he discovered that the seemingly ordinary, 2-story cement and stone building was surprisingly spacious and expansive. The reception hall, hundreds of square meters in size, was bustling with activity, with countless people busily passing through, carrying documents. Residents seeking assistance lined up in an orderly fashion before windows adorned with various signs. Seeing him standing awkwardly at the doorway, the receptionist, who had approached him, quickly directed him to the Population Management Department window. As Dave waited obediently at the end of the long line, the eagle-eyed receptionist spotted the envelope he was clutching tightly in his hands, and the red seal affixed to it. "Talent recommendation application," the receptionist muttered something under his breath, stretched out his hand to stop Dave, and said softly, "Sir, please follow me to the office. Your entry permit and identity verification procedures will be processed here." Orange Peel, the deputy director of the City Hall in charge of population management, pushed open the door and walked in hurriedly, Talent recommended by the canned food processing factory? What special skills? Born a noble in the southern region? Why didn't I receive the news in advance? He asked a long list of questions in one breath like a machine gun, shocking the receptionist and the affairs officer sitting in the office. They hurriedly said, poor people who moved from the old royal capital, special skills. It is said that they have a good memory, comparable to having a photographic memory. Orange Peel curled his lips, his face a little unhappy. Since we promulgated the talent recommendation policy for the whole region, we have received so many exaggerated recommendation applications. Don't you guys verify them in advance? After that, he turned to look at Dave, who was huddled aside trembling with fear, raised his hand and pointed to the thick document on the desk. I'll give you a quarter of an hour. Can you memorize all the data in this document? Dave had no idea what a talent recommendation application was, nor did he know why so many unexpected events had occurred since he was inexplicably dragged into this room. Wasn't he originally here to apply for a city entry permit? Why had he suddenly offended these officials? He swallowed hard and said, "My dear stewards, I can't read." Orange Peel took a deep breath and was about to explode when the official interrupted and explained. The factory manager wrote that it only took him half a day to memorize the locations of the cans corresponding to dozens of different labels. He could remember the type, name, weight, and production date. Labeling canned food is indeed a simple yet tedious task. The reason alchemical beasts weren't used to replace human labor was simply because they couldn't distinguish the different can types corresponding to different labels. With the rapid development of the territory's food industry, a vast variety of canned goods arrive from processing plants daily. To facilitate sales, transportation, and storage, even the same ingredient is packaged into cans of varying sizes, based on quantity. Furthermore, cans destined for export require strict labeling with production batches and dates to prevent spoilage. Experienced workers who have been doing this for a long time are naturally familiar with this process. Even if they occasionally forget something, they can quickly check the label catalog. However, Dave, completely illiterate, mastered the process in record time by memorizing the colors and shapes of the characters on each label, completing his entire internship month without a single mistake. This is undoubtedly a talent far beyond the average. Orange Peel, skeptical, had a thick stack of occupational registration cards brought to him, shuffled them, and placed them in front of Dave. He discovered that, despite being completely illiterate, he had managed to neatly return the cards to their original file boxes simply by memorizing the shapes of the characters and the stamps on the cards. Even the numbers were perfectly accurate. The clerk leaned close to Orange Peel's ear and whispered, "Isn't this the kind of person with a photographic memory and exceptional memory that the newly established archives department needs? But he can't even read," muttered the receptionist who had first spotted his talent, causing Dave's face to flush. Orange Peel slapped his forehead and said decisively, "If he can't read, learn. He's so smart, learning shouldn't be a big deal." Then, he lowered his composure and gently asked the bewildered Dave, "If you were transferred from the cannery to the archives department at City Hall, would you be willing?" "Of course. Before that, we'd send you to Territorial Public College, for a month of literacy training." Dave had no idea what archives management was, but it seemed to have something to do with his excellent memory. Otherwise, he definitely wouldn't have been qualified for the job. He mustered his courage and asked cautiously, So, what's the monthly salary for an archives manager?" Chapter 484, Nominal Persuasion to Surrender. Boom, boom, boom. 3 shells flew from the muzzle of the magic-powered cannon, blasting towards the distant enemy position. Standing 10 meters from the cannon, Dickinson could feel the ground tremble slightly. Seconds later, clouds of dust rose from the distant enemy lines. The chaotic scene of soldiers and horses falling nearly a mile away seemed like a silent pantomime to him. This direct confrontation was markedly different from the attack on the old capital. Both sides, without the protection of fortified walls, relied solely on sophisticated weaponry and the bravery of their soldiers to defeat their opponents. The knights of St. Valen's capital and the cavalry of other great noble lords were indeed among the elite forces of the central kingdoms of the southern continent, but they were facing the magical army of the King of the North. Watching his former comrades crumble in such a crushing and relentless attack, Dickinson leaned slightly to the side with a sense of pity, subconsciously squinting his eyes at the ground. Ivan, the young officer who had been standing beside him, glanced at them and explained casually, "Sir Knight, we've tried to persuade them to surrender. The other lords have accepted and voluntarily withdrawn their troops from the Vatican's coalition forces. Only the leader of the royal capital knights remained stubborn. They face only a ruthless judgment. Long before the northern army arrived, the vast majority of the feudal lords had already received news of the fall of the royal capital and the Archduke's abdication and death. They knew the terrifying weapons and extraordinary means at the hands of the northern lords. Anyone who valued their lives and their hard-earned cavalry would not resist in such a one-sided situation. Last night, Dickinson, who had been tasked with persuading them to surrender, led a small group of soldiers to the camps of each lord. They were all greeted with the gracious hospitality of a royal envoy. Only the royal capital knights, who were at the forefront of the border battles, mingling with the church's inquisition, were met with the expected rebuff. So, at dawn today, as scouts brought word of the withdrawal of the remaining noble lords, the northern army also discovered intelligence that the royal capital knights, in conjunction with the church's inquisition army, were slowly advancing toward the northern army's camp. The two cavalry units totaled nearly 2,000, but no trace of the Vatican's bloodline knights or battle priests was to be found among them. These main forces, who had been engaged in a nearly 6-month battle with the Dallas Mage warband on the border, seemed to remain focused on their old rivals, the spellcasters, and paid little attention to the northern army's sudden appearance behind them. This pure cavalry charge posed little threat to the northern army at this point. Even as the enemy assembled their cavalry formation a mile away, 3 magically powered cannons roared, mercilessly blasting the densely packed enemy. The sniper squads, originally positioned on the flank slopes to guard against high-ranking priests and bloodline knights, finding no targets, turned their sights to the knight officers, their brilliantly armored and fluttering banners. Several knight commanders suddenly shuddered, their chests sprayed with blood mixed with armor fragments, and they fell silently from their horses. This elite cavalry regiment, once invincible on the battlefields of various nations, was finally thrown into complete disarray. The valiant charge of 1,000 cavalrymen was over before it even began. The frightened war horses mercilessly trampled the thrown knights. Those cavalrymen who managed to keep control of their horses clutched at their reins, instinctively retreating to the rear of the formation. The ordinary infantry, already at the rear, could not discern the officers' orders in the chaos, and blocked the cavalry's retreat. No one knew the precise nature of the dark shadows that kept flying from afar. All they knew was that once they landed among the dense crowd, a violent explosion and flames would erupt. Within a radius of dozens of meters, everyone was covered in blood, flesh, and limbs, leaving not a single intact body untouched. The knights perched on their horses were even more fearful, fearing their comrades' chests or heads would suddenly explode, armor and all, sending blood and armor shards splattering all around them. The scene was a scene of hell. Wayne, holding a pair of binoculars, calmly observed the devastating scene unfolding within the enemy ranks. He never ordered a halt to the bombardment. He had no intention of returning the 100 magical shells he had brought to the border untouched. "Commander," shouted the scout, also in charge of observation. "The enemy may not be able to complete their cavalry assembly. Should we order the troops forward?" "Wait a minute." Wayne lowered his telescope and shook his head slowly, not once glancing at the pale-faced Dickinson standing beside him. The bombardment continued for 2 more rounds. Seeing that the enemy formation was already uncontrollable and showing signs of collapse, many soldiers, eager to fight, turned their heads frequently, looking at the commander's position, wondering why he hadn't ordered the entire army to advance to meet the enemy. A moment later, a pitch-black night owl suddenly appeared out of thin air in front of Wayne, flapping its wings and slamming into his unconsciously raised palm. The bird instantly disintegrated into a puff of ashes, leaving a small piece of paper in his palm. As agreed, Dallas's Federation mages launched an offensive against the Church's inquisitors early this morning. It was their ability to hold back these equally powerful Church clerics that enabled the Northern Army to unbridledly bombard immortal cavalry with crushing results. By attacking from both sides, the Church's armed forces and the nobles affiliated with them would be completely annihilated. This was the cooperative plan Harvey had agreed upon with the Federation before the troops were dispatched to the capital. The so-called persuasion to surrender was merely a formality to bolster public opinion, offering a welcome change of heart to the nobles of St. Valen who chose to cooperate. Those who refused to surrender would be executed on the spot. This was the true order Harvey personally issued to Pierce and the remaining officers before returning to Spark City. At this rate, aside from the shrewd nobles who had received advance warning and quietly retreated last night, the stubborn few who dared to confront the Northern Army today likely wouldn't even have the chance to surrender. With a command, The infantry, already eager for action, slowly advanced toward the enemy position. Only when they were within rifle range did the enemy, barely managing to rally their disorganized ranks, charge at them under the raging shots of the surviving officers. A barrage of gunfire echoed across the wilderness like raindrops. A puff of white smoke billowed from the Northern Army's infantry positions, the smoke from the new magical bullets infused with dragon flame powder. Over 50 knights and their infantry retinues fell to the muddy grass like wheat before they could even reach within 50 meters of the Northern Army's positions. They're sitting ducks, defenseless. Their charge is nowhere near as impressive as the Church's Knights of the Shining Spear. Nonsense. That's a cavalry regiment composed entirely of bloodline knights. Wayne's Northern Army, numbering less than 1,000, didn't even activate their magical machine guns. Relying solely on the power of their repeating rifles, they mowed down the enemy mid-charge. This was the first charge by the Royal City Knights and the Church Knights, and it would also be the last cavalry charge of the war. Afterwards, the entire enemy formation collapsed in an instant. Chapter 485 Population Explosion. After the second captured red lizard sacrificed his life, a thick new lab report appeared on Harvey's desk. Dozens of pages of damage testing reports detailed the demon lizard's reactions to attacks other than magical weapons, and, as Harvey had predicted, their skin was also immune to divine attacks. However, perhaps due to significant differences in their physiological structure compared to humans, they experienced minimal damage response to plagues, toxins, and mental attacks. Currently, only freezing and sedation seemed to offer some effectiveness. This forced Harvey to abandon his plans for biochemical weapons and focus instead on their unique black water weaponry. This liquid weapon, derived from red lizard's body fluids, while its composition was unknown, was definitely highly flammable, effectively a weak fire. As long as the battle wasn't conducted in icy water, Harvey was confident he could develop thermal weapons capable of widespread blazing effects, such as incendiary bombs, which would be a promising option against the demon lizards. The brief summer in the north quickly drew to a close, and with the arrival of autumn, Spark City's population surged once again. With the fall of the old capital, the nation's most prominent cities, including Finnegan City, Grizzly Castle, Silver Pine City, Black Mountain Port, and Sancher Town, successively changed hands, effectively bringing 70% of the Duchy of St. Valen under Harvey's control. These towns, fresh from the brutal war, underwent a dramatic transformation. Nobles, coerced and induced to surrender their fiefdoms in order to protect themselves, while the once honest tenant farmers saw their fields nearly destroyed by the flames of war, or were trampled upon by looting nobles from neighboring kingdoms. They watched their year's hard work go to waste, and before even the cold winter arrived, they were plunged into a dire plight of starvation and poverty. Harvey's recruitment efforts in the southeastern regions immediately saw a surge in effectiveness. Unlike the previous practice of covert recruitment by secret police, the City Hall now established subordinate municipal departments in nearly every populous city, openly recruiting new labor. Sancher Town, once a mere river transit port, now saw nearly 1,000 refugees arriving from the southeastern regions each week, awaiting northbound ships to take them to the recruitment drive. Spark City, where everyone had comfortable housing and stable jobs, leading a prosperous and secure life. To prevent any accidents before the refugees arrived in the north, the City Hall dispatched a construction team from the Ministry of Construction to Sancher Town. In a remarkably short time, they doubled the size of the port town, originally populated by over 1,000 people. They established a relief canteen and a free medical station, and built numerous stone brick barracks for temporary shelter. This meant that even in the depths of winter, the refugees wouldn't have to worry about freezing or starving. After the opening of the Divine Ridge Tunnel, Jackdaw Ridge, less than 5 hours from Spark City, naturally became the busiest gateway to the north. City Hall and the police department deployed nearly 30% of their personnel and police force to maintain order and security at this border crossing, ensuring that every person boarding the train to Spark City completed a thorough background check and identity registration. Meanwhile, Spark City's population management officials meticulously categorized the influx of refugees from across the country and relocated them to 3 temporary shelters outside the city, located to the east, west, and south. Although Reiner, the city's chief administrator, was on duty almost 24/7, the perennially understaffed main city hall remained incredibly busy and in a state of chaos. This was entirely due to the swift implementation of Harvey's southern border operations plan, which saw nearly half of the main city hall's personnel deployed to establish subordinate municipal administrative departments throughout the southern border. A telegram has arrived. In half an hour, a group of refugees from the Southern Territory will arrive at the central station. There are about 500 of them, from the vicinity of Silverpine City. Silverpine City again. How come they can recruit so many refugees there, Tisk? The crappy nobles of Silverpine City would rather voluntarily hand over their land and send large amounts of jewelry and treasures to our city lord as tribute to seek peace, than take out the damp grain in the warehouse to help the people. Most of the fields over there have been destroyed by war, and the locals can't make a living at all. Bah. They should really be shown those stupid nobles in the old capital being hanged on the gallows, and reflect on themselves. Stop talking. There's no need to kill and eat obedient dogs right away. Hurry and go outside the city to meet the car. What bad luck. I'm transferred to Sancher Town next week, and I'm responsible for the transfer of people. This is my first time to the Southern Territory. I heard that the towns over there don't even have sewers, and dirty water is flowing all over the ground. The houses don't have running water, heating or lighting. I really don't know how I'm going to survive. You've got to go through this. That way, your boss will have a good impression of you during the year-end review. Stop complaining. Remember to bring plenty of cigarettes and soap. You can't get those goodies in the southern border. Sitting in the second-floor manager's office, Reiner found a rare moment of peace. His alchemical hearing allowed him to hear the cacophony of conversations downstairs and pinpoint who was speaking. Since the construction and restructuring of City Hall, there had been no idle moments. But recent events had left Reiner, who had long considered himself qualified for the role of city manager, feeling a tinge of anxiety and impatience. With a widespread recruitment of refugees, Spark City had experienced a sudden surge in foreign population in late summer. This uncontrolled influx of outsiders naturally led to frequent public security problems and a sharp rise in crime. Even the usually calm and capable chief of police, Uriel, who had just been promoted to Deputy Minister of Justice, had his shiny black hair turned slightly gray at the temples in less than a month. Remember, he just turned 30 and hasn't even officially started a family yet. Mr. Chief, I didn't want to ask you for something at such a busy time in City Hall. Even if Uriel was extremely busy, he always kept his back straight and looked very energetic. His police superintendent uniform was brand new and neat. The first thing he said was what Reiner hated to hear. The refugee shelter outside the city is in urgent need of staff. I applied for the emergency recruitment of 200 trainee police officers a week ago, but you rejected my application without even looking at it. I can only come to you in person to ask for more staff. Reiner leaned over the desk, holding a pen and quickly drafting a document. Without even raising his head, the mechanical tentacles hanging on his spine silently stretched out of his robe, pulled out a document from the bookshelf behind him, and handed it directly to Uriel, who was sitting opposite him. It's not that I deliberately ignore the requirements of the police department, but the recruitment of police officers requires locals, clean backgrounds and reliable character, and the age limit is between 20 and 40 years old. You also know that people with such conditions are high-quality candidates that the military and various factories in Spark City are vying for. When it comes to your side, how can we have any extra manpower to assign? Uriel raised his eyebrows. Facing the most powerful figure under the command of the city lord, he had no fear or perfunctory mentality. But the security problem in the internment zone is urgent. If it is not curbed immediately, it will soon spread to the city. When the time comes, the city lord will hold us accountable, and we will all be responsible. As soon as he said these threatening words, Reiner, whose emotional perception had gradually subsided, suddenly became angry. He finally raised his head and stared at the other party for a few seconds with his soul fire in his eyes dancing. Inspector, threatening me won't solve the problem, Reiner explained calmly. Unless the recruitment requirements set by the city lord himself are changed, there's nothing I can do. Uriel, ready to force him to say this himself, quickly softened his stance and politely suggested, I have a solution. How about we jointly propose to the city lord that we introduce alchemical artifacts to cooperate with the police department in managing city security? What do you think? If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 486 Public Security and Food Famine. This is indeed a big problem that needs to be solved urgently. Harvey sat upright in the castle office, put down the work report handed to him by Reiner, cleared his throat and frowned. During this period, I have devoted all my energy to dealing with alien enemies, and I have relaxed a little on the internal control of Spark City. On the one hand, it was naturally because of the high anxiety caused by the coming of the demon lizardmen from the north, and on the other hand, it was also out of trust in this old subordinate who could coordinate the overall situation for him and manage all the internal affairs of the territory in an orderly manner. Reiner only revealed obvious emotional fluctuations in his humanity when facing Harvey. He complained in a low voice, "Sir, I'm so busy that my soul core is about to smoke, and Mr. Uriel has to give me some difficult problems at this time. He actually wants to introduce alchemical creations into the police department and let them assist ordinary police officers in maintaining law and order in the city." Oh, Harvey raised his eyebrows in surprise. He has some unexpected ideas. What do you think of this? In the entire Spark City, except for me, as Dallin and Mr. Arturo, the rest of the alchemical creations are not made by transferring human souls. In essence, they are more like mechanical beasts implanted with fixed commands. It is naturally no problem to use them to cooperate with soldiers in overseas operations, but if they are used for internal security, I'm afraid it's a bit too much. Harvey couldn't help but chuckle. As the first person to be transformed into an alchemical life, Reiner still retained the most basic humanity and emotions after such a long time. He never regarded alchemical creations of the same origin and kind as him as his own people. Instead, he seemed a little defensive. This was a good thing, and it made Harvey feel that his first alchemical creation was flawless in every way. Are you worried that the alchemical creations lack humanity and will enforce the law too harshly and brutally, causing the city's citizens to loathe and fear them? Reiner nodded honestly. After all, they're mostly stitched together from the souls of various beasts. They only undergo the three of us and your input at the factory. They're not nearly as smooth and flexible as living humans. Harvey nodded in agreement, pulling out a piece of paper and scribbling a note. Reiner took it, examining it intently, and said, bewilderedly, "Police. Criminal police? Sir, what does that mean?" Harvey, having coined two new words in just half a minute, coughed awkwardly and patiently explained, "Daily disputes and minor offenses between ordinary citizens are handled by human police officers. Serious crimes like personal injury, serial murder, and violent robbery are handled by alchemical creations in conjunction with the police." He paused and said seriously, "The police department and the Ministry of Justice are as important territory management departments as the army. Although their responsibilities are only internal, they also need to be clearly divided. Dealing with the people also requires two-pronged preparation, and appeasement and deterrence are indispensable." Reiner suddenly realized and blurted out, "I understand. Sir, this is what you said about a carrot-and-stick approach to governing the territory." Harvey laughed and couldn't help but praise Reiner. "When you were a human, you were almost middle-aged. I didn't expect that after becoming an alchemical life, you are getting younger and younger, and your ability to learn by analogy is not inferior to mine. You know I just have a good memory, and this talent of remembering everything you hear is also given by you when you created me." The problem of the talent gap in public security police was solved. Before Harvey could take a breath, Reiner immediately took out another document from the briefcase on his waist and handed it to Harvey. After a quick glance, Harvey immediately realized the current problem was far more serious than the public security situation in Spark City. How could this happen? Is it due to the recent overabundance of recruits from the southern border? According to our original estimate, the influx of foreigners in just a month and a half shouldn't exceed 3,000. But the reality is far more than that, sir. The massive civil unrest sparked by the nobles of St. Valen and the lords of neighboring countries has actually harmed countless people at the bottom of society, already struggling on the brink of poverty and starvation. These impoverished people, who rely entirely on farming for their livelihood, had endured the ravages of war and persecution by the nobles. Their ultimate fate was nothing more than struggling to survive a harvestless autumn, followed by death from starvation or freezing in their hometowns or on the road during the freezing winter. But the city hall, aggressively recruiting people throughout the duchy, offered them their only hope of survival. With no food to eat, no one would mind leaving their homes for the wilderness. The desire to survive compelled them to board the passenger ship bound for the north without hesitation. Originally, our food reserves could easily last until winter. After the Dongchuo base completes the autumn harvest, The territory's granaries will naturally be full again. But now the number of refugees in the southern border has more than tripled than expected. Reiner paused, seeming a little hesitant, but half a minute later he decisively said, "My suggestion is to stop accepting refugees and first ensure the food supply for the local people in Spark City." Before he finished speaking, he was interrupted by Harvey with a frown. "No. We must never stop recruiting refugees. Although the war in the Principality has ended, people from the southeast will continue to flock to the north. In addition to believing that we can provide them with food and shelter for survival, these people also hope that Spark City is really as they imagined, a wasteland paradise where they can live and work in peace and contentment. The promise has been made. Once we stop accepting and abandon the remaining people, the image and reputation we have built among the people will be immediately destroyed. If there is a shortage of labor and soldiers in the future, it will be difficult to recruit people from all over. Moreover, the long-term development plan in Harvey's mind already needs to rely on a large number of agricultural population who have lost their land. The undeveloped land in the wasteland is vast. Even if the urban population is expanded to 100,000, it will only occupy a small corner of it. As long as the bottleneck of food shortage caused by the population explosion is overcome, Harvey is confident that he can ignite the spark of urban industrialization in a short time. Notify all the major chambers of commerce in the southern border immediately. Harvey made the decision directly. I know they have been paying close attention to the situation in the central countries headed by St. Valen. These businessmen with a keen sense of smell must have stockpiled a lot of food waiting to be sold at a higher price. Reiner was surprised and said, "Sir, you plan to import food at a high price?" After getting Harvey's affirmative answer, the mayor took out a general account book from his waist with some pain, flipped through a few pages awkwardly, and muttered in a low voice, "Then I'm afraid your naval plan, railway plan, military factory expansion, and new weapons research and development projects will have to be temporarily shelved indefinitely due to lack of funds." While Harvey was stunned with his mouth open, Reiner added another finishing move. "Also, the exploration team you ordered, led by Lord Duncan, has already contacted 3 refugee settlements deep in the wilderness. Headed by the Snow Mountain settlement, they number over 5,000 people in total. If all goes well, their entire tribe will migrate to Spark City before winter arrives. After generations of hardship, they've finally found a place to settle down and thrive." Chapter 487, Robbery. The short-term crisis of food shortages and the long-term policy of absorbing foreign populations, there's a natural contradiction between the two, and in a sense, this is the bottleneck we currently need to address. If Harvey remembers correctly, since the border conflict between St. Varen and Dallas in late autumn last year, food prices have skyrocketed across the central southern kingdoms. Not only have prices increased dramatically, but many merchant guilds, taking advantage of the situation, have secretly stockpiled food, hoping to profit greatly from raising prices after winter. High-priced imported food can only temporarily alleviate the immediate crisis. It's certainly unsustainable in the long term. Even several of the southern guilds, led by the Dragonstone Guild, with whom Harvey has always maintained close ties, have written letters to apologize. With the autumn harvest just a month or two away, no one has much food left. While wheat might be enough to feed a few thousand people, a bit of it could be shipped in. Anything more would be insufficient. It's better to rely on oneself than on others. Spark City's food reserves haven't reached the critical threshold yet, so they can barely make it to the end of the month. The East Expansion Base's first good harvest is a source of income, but the more important thing now is to consider how to cut costs. Reiner proposed a relatively feasible solution: reduce food supplies from various regions, strictly control the amount of food people buy, and allow foreign grain dealers to only bring in, not out. At the same time, reduce the quota for processed foods. First, ensure that the people have enough to eat. If they want to eat well, they can only wait until the East Expansion Base's harvest arrives. However, this approach clearly violates the promise made to the people. Newly annexed cities like Jinhu City and Fingigan City are fine. But the people of Spark City and Grizzly Castle, who have long enjoyed a comfortable life, are unlikely to accept it. It's always easier to go from frugality to luxury than from luxury to frugality. After being accustomed to eating white bread every day, suddenly switching to oatmeal porridge will inevitably lead to panic over food shortages. The next day, at a high-level meeting in Harvey's castle, Asdalon proposed a solution that really caught Harvey's attention. Actually, this trouble was also encountered by the Kingdom of Evernight when they first migrated to the depths of the wasteland. The soul fire in Asdalan's eyes flickered, as if he was lost in long-lost memories. The migrating team composed of wizards and bloodline followers also encountered a crisis of food shortage. In order to build the magnificent city of Evernight, they recruited many refugees from the wasteland without restraint, and finally found it difficult to feed this group of people. Well, judging from the scale of the Evernight ruins, the number of refugees who participated in the construction of the city was probably not less than 10,000. Harvey nodded, and said with a sigh, moreover, there is no way to grow food in the wasteland and the ice sea. It is difficult to ensure a continuous supply by fishing and hunting alone. Asdalan chuckled and said slowly, so, when food is tight before winter, the city managers at that time will turn their attention to the large number of evil orc tribes? Reiner was stunned. You mean? Harvey raised his hand and knocked on the table, then took over the conversation and said in a deep voice, rely on robbery. The evil orcs are naturally good at raising livestock, and they have enslaved a large number of refugees from the wasteland to cultivate the land for them. If you rob them in the autumn when the cattle and sheep are fat, you will definitely return with a full load, but the evil orcs are too widely distributed in the wasteland, and the tribes are also very scattered. Although the total number of tribes seems very large, it is really time-consuming and laborious to sweep through each small tribe one by one. Moreover, Pierce is still in the old capital, and the soldiers sent to various places in the southern border to fight have not returned. The actual combat force available to Spark City is not sufficient. Harvey shook his head. Honestly, I don't take the fel orcs, these insignificant creatures, seriously. He stood up and walked over to a map hanging on the wall. With a single gesture, he directed everyone's attention from the wasteland back to the southern border. When the border conflict broke out between St. Valen and Datius, the border Duke of Barclay, in the name of the church, suddenly sent troops into the country and attacked several cities and regions in southern St. Valen, particularly Silverpine City and Black Mountain Port. These two places are considered the granaries of the duchy, although the border Duke of Barclay prudently withdrew his troops quietly after the fall of Golden Radiant City and the spread of news of the church's judgment legions defeated the old capital. The vast amount of food and treasure he loaded was a real profit. And right now, the three combat units of the Northern Army are all located at the intersection of Silverpine City, Black Mountain Port, and the border between the three countries. I heard that the border Duke Barclay, to justify his campaign, has co-opted many of his country's nobles into his campaigns, using every possible means to plunder the southern part of the principality. Everyone's making a killing, said Asdalan with a hint of disdain. If we defeat them one by one, the rewards will definitely be greater than raiding those barbaric fel orc tribes. Reiner hesitated for a moment, then said, in that case, wouldn't it be considered us actively invading a neighboring country? Harvey said nonchalantly, taking back what they've taken from us, that's called debt collection. Of course, charging some extra interest during this debt collection process is reasonable, as long as the action is swift and covert. There's no time for the Barclay capital to react, and the plunder will be enough to refill the Starfire City granaries. Moreover, if memory serves, the founding member of the Spellcaster Forum, codenamed Earthbane, is a descendant of the Barclay royal family and a high-ranking spellcaster holding considerable worldly power. Mr. Earthburn himself had clearly sided with him during the Forum referendum. Faced with the traitorous princes within his own country who sided with the church, he must have been eager for Harvey to eliminate them. Thinking of this, Harvey suddenly had an idea. He hadn't appeared on the Spellcaster Forum for a long time, even the daily forum management duties had mostly been handed over to Arstolan. He needed to find some free time to attend the weekly discussion meetings and gauge their current attitudes and trends. After the high-level meeting, Harvey immediately returned to his study. He activated his magic brain and logged into the forum with ease. He happened to spot the codename Earthburn prominently listed in the online list. Without hesitation, Harvey immediately sent him a request for a private chat, which he quickly received. Kilthuzid, Mr. Earthburn, excuse me for interrupting. I have a practical question I'd like to ask you for an answer. Earth-loving one, haha, it's an honor to have this opportunity to speak privately with Mr. Agent. Please let me know if there's anything I can help you with. Harvey couldn't help but curl his lips into a faint smile. This founding member of the forum had always impressed him as gentle and courteous. As a spellcaster of noble birth, he held a very upright stance. While he was reluctant to associate with the Union factions, he didn't directly side with the church either. This was evident from his initial offer to help forum members in their raid on church witch hunters within Barclay. In the subsequent forum referendum, He also pledged to use his influence to expel church forces from his homeland for the Union. Kilthuzid, free assistance is not in line with the forum's purpose. I currently require detailed information on the Grand Duke of the Border Principality of Barclay, including his birth name, family background, fiefdom power, and armed forces. As for the price in exchange, please feel free to suggest it. Gathering information about a neighboring prince in the real world wasn't difficult. Even if Harvey had a secret police do it, it would only take a while. However, by proactively asking the Earth-loving one on the forum, he was actually trying to gauge his personal attitude and opinions. Beating a dog is certainly advisable, but asking the suspected owner's attitude first is a necessary courtesy. Chapter 488 The Kaufman Family. Harvey, half tentatively and half seeking confirmation, sought information on the border Duke Barclay from Earthburn on the forum. He expected a polite refusal or a rather perfunctory response, but the answer surprised him. Earthburn, Mr. Kilthuzid, regarding the border Duke, you don't need to tell me. I'm sure you have various ways to find out. Carlo Kaufman, the border Duke ennobled by the Baroque royal family, shares my surname. If we trace back, he should even call me great-uncle. Harvey raised an eyebrow in surprise. A border Duke over 50 actually called Mr. Earthburn his great-uncle? This high-level spellcaster, usually so gentle and low-key on the forum, must be quite old. Could he be a century-old mage like Mr. Scorching Lord? Yet, he showed no signs of reaching legendary status. If we were to measure the lifespan of a typical high-level spellcaster, wouldn't he be nearing the end of his life? Why hadn't he ever asked for a way to prolong his lifespan in the forums? The spellcasters of the Kaufman family possess secret methods to slow aging and increase lifespan. Just as the doubts arose, the other party immediately and frankly provided the answer. Earthbane, haha, are you wondering, as Carlo Kaufman's grandfather, my true age must be over 100 years old. Why haven't I experienced a decline in rank due to excessive aging and a depletion of my magical power? Kilthuzid, if this is a secret within your family, out of courtesy and protocol, I shouldn't pry. It would be too offensive. Earthbane, it's not a big deal. These matters may be a secret to the royal family, but among spellcasters, they're commonplace, and some are even known to everyone. The Kaufman family inherited part of the ancient High Elves bloodline. Although the bloodline has gradually become diluted after hundreds of years, the advantage of longevity has been barely preserved. Harvey suddenly understood. No wonder Mr. Earthbender, despite being born into a royal family, had chosen to become a spellcaster. His natural advantage of longevity gave him more time than ordinary spellcasters to pursue advancements in his lifespan. Even if he ultimately failed to reach the legendary realm, he would still retain greater power than ordinary wizards in old age, without having to worry about a significant decline in strength due to mana depletion. Kilthuzid, does everyone in the Kaufman family possess the longevity gene? What about Duke Carlo himself? Earthbender, if I'm not mistaken, you intend to attack the Barclay border nobles commanded by Carlo. To exact revenge for their unprovoked months of harassment on the St. Veron border, as expected of one of the forum's founding members, having navigated various factions within the spellcaster forum for so long, he could see through Harvey's intentions and schemes. Naturally, Harvey didn't show any fear or hesitation, and readily and frankly acknowledged them. Kilthuzid, yes, this is the price Duke Carlo must pay. The chaos there rashly unleashed has resulted in countless civilian casualties within our borders, and vast tracts of farmland and villages have been completely destroyed. Even in the early autumn, just as the harvest was about to begin, a large number of famine refugees have emerged across the entire southern part of the principality. The crystal screen of the magical brain device remained silent for a long time. It looked as if Mr. Earthbender was at a loss for words, but Harvey remained unfazed. After all, it was simply a gesture to convey his position. There was no need to be overly harsh. Earthbender, although Carlo possesses royal blood, it is a branch of the royal family. I have no personal connection to him. When the forum voted to expel and curb the church's influence, I used my influence to cooperate in the capital. However, when the royal order reached his border fiefdom, it received no due response or respect. He has always stood firmly on the side of the church. The message was clear. If you want to fight, go ahead. It's none of my business anyway. For a Grand Duke who doesn't even respect his own royal family, having an outsider to speak up for him is actually a good thing. Harvey was naturally pleased with this response. The other party clearly showed him respect and honor due to his status as a forum agent, Otherwise, given the Duchy of Berkeley's inherent strength, it wouldn't be without the resources to fight St. Valen. Of course, this assumes the other party doesn't know the power of the magical weapons he possesses. After all, wars in St. Valen are often only publicly reported after news reaches neighboring states, with the specific details of the battles remaining unknown. The Earthbender then recounted to Harvey the rise of Border Duke Carlo Kaufman, the existence of vassal nobles within his territory, and the strength of the renowned Baroque border knights, sharing every detail with complete candor. Satisfied with the answer, Harvey was about to exchange a few pleasantries and end this pleasant online exchange, but the other party suddenly posed a question. Earthchoosed, Mr. Kilthuzid, excuse me for asking, now that you have completely taken control of the Principality of St. Valen, do you intend to officially ascend the throne and become the new Grand Duke of St. Valen? He seemed to be unable to contain himself, so he asked at the very end. In the nearly 1,000 years of history of the Southern Kingdoms, it is indeed rare for a spellcaster to ascend to a secular throne. Looking back further, the only such figure is the founder of the Union, the mysterious first chief of the Union. Rumor has it that he was first in line to the throne of the Orlandi royal family. At that time, Orlandi was not yet a leader of the seven wizarding kingdoms, but a powerful secular nation that controlled the western part of the continent. The origins and past background of this mysterious chief, who renounced his claim to the throne, seem to have been deliberately obliterated from history. No matter how hard later generations have tried to uncover his true identity, they have never been able to uncover it. Numerous rumors, both true and false, persist. Regardless, organizations like the Union and the High Wizard Council, as well as noble spellcasters like the Earthbender, were closely watching Harvey's next moves. If you were to replace the previous Archduke family, appointed by the Church, and ascend the throne of St. Valen, the political situation in the southern continent would undoubtedly be drastically shaken. Not only would the Church react strongly, but the royal families of other secular kingdoms would also be on edge. With a precedent Harvey set, who knew if other powerful spellcasters would follow his example and directly seize secular power? When the Union and the Church formed an alliance to fight the demons, the Covenant clearly stipulated that spellcasters could not arbitrarily interfere with the succession of secular kings. Every king of a secular kingdom was personally appointed by the then current pope, effectively a token of their loyalty and asylum in order to secure their throne. Harvey's response was unexpected, leaving the Earthbender somewhat bewildered. Kilthuzid, I personally don't really care about these false reputations. But if the situation becomes tense and requires the unification of all forces that can be united, I will choose to stand up without hesitation, so, please wait and see. Chapter 489 Staff and Officers. After Harvey decided to launch a revenge operation against the neighboring Grand Duke of Berkeley, he immediately issued war orders to the territory's military. The increasingly powerful military immediately began pre-war preparations, with all departments operating efficiently. Ammunition produced by the Spark City military factories were continuously transported across the Ralph River to Silver Pine City and Black Mountain Port, the closest frontier cities to the border fiefdom of the Duchy of Berkeley. The new recruits, who had undergone 2 rounds of expansion after the spring plowing, had largely completed their induction training. Those who performed well were directly separated and reorganized into the Ace 1st Battalion of the Northern Frontier Army, currently stationed in the Royal Capital. The remaining men were assigned to the 2nd and 3rd Battalions, stationed in Silver Pine City and Black Mountain Port, to supplement the flank forces. As a result, the total combat manpower available in the entire Southern Territory rapidly expanded to over 5,000. Forget about just dealing with a mere border duke from a neighboring nation. As long as logistical support kept up, even heading west and attacking the holy city of Gowers would be no problem. Of course, such a large-scale war mobilization also aroused the ambitions of many high-ranking officers in the Northern Territory Army. They were not content with merely conquering an ordinary noble. The combat reports that poured into Harvey contained many more radical ideas and suggestions, some even considering the neighboring nation of Berkeley and the papal states adjacent to Danius as future targets. Harvey naturally sneered at this. While these officers' thinking and actions were indeed far superior to those of ordinary military nobles of the current era, they were still somewhat short-sighted compared to himself, a time traveler who had witnessed modern warfare in his previous life. Large-scale modern warfare relied on a strong military industry and logistical capabilities. Given Spark City's current manufacturing and transportation capabilities, the further away from the north the war was fought, the higher the corresponding cost of each war. Recklessly waging war would only gradually cripple Spark City, which had only just begun to industrialize. Although the actual available forces were sufficient, based on the intelligence provided by the Earth-loving ones, Harvey believed that this debt collection operation would not be too difficult. After consulting with Pierce, who was stationed in the old capital, they decided to set the final expedition force at 2,000 men, to be commanded by Pierce himself. The 1st Battalion, commanded by Vaughn, would serve as the primary combat force, with the 2nd Battalion stationed in Silver Pine City and the 3rd Battalion stationed in Black Mountain Port, each adding 500 men to provide flanking support. Considering the loyalty of Grand Duke Barclay to the Church, the battle might involve the presence of Vatican combat priests or high-ranking bloodline knights. Several spellcasters from the Academy of Magic would also accompany the expedition, led by Prawl and Sirius, both high-ranking individuals. With a large number of controllable combat alchemical beasts, they would officially launch their alchemical creations into the southern battlefield. With the nascent General Staff Headquarters centrally planning and coordinating. The time from Harvey's order to complete assembly and preparations took less than a week. The staff, who had arrived in the old capital in advance to rendezvous with Commander Pierce, continually discussed tactical details with the dispatched officers to ensure the success of this overseas operation. However, regarding the timing of the actual engagement, the officers directing the battle on the front lines and the newly integrated staff, still somewhat unfamiliar with the military system, were divided, with no final conclusions being reached. 1st Battalion Commander Vaughn was a traditionalist adept at siege warfare. He firmly believed that with sufficient firepower, a straightforward advance could be achieved. There was no problem that couldn't be solved with a salvo of 20 cannons, complemented by airship bombardments. He believed that as long as logistical support was ensured and the expeditionary force fully utilized its firepower advantage, the Border Duke's fiefdom could be captured in 3 days at most, without resorting to convoluted tactics like luring the enemy. The young staff officers, personally trained by Harvey and Esdelin, preferred luring the enemy out of fortified cities and setting the engagement in the open, undefended wilderness. This approach avoided the excessive consumption of ammunition and supplies during a siege, while also effectively wiping out the enemy's vital forces. According to intelligence, since Barclay's mass expulsion of church forces from the capital, many church personnel and devout believers have fled to Bluethorn City, governed by the Border Grand Duke. This entire border fiefdom has become the church's only remaining sanctuary within Barclay. In the event of a siege, there's no guarantee that these believers wouldn't be instigated by the church to enthusiastically participate in the city's defense, even engaging directly in combat with the Northern Frontier Army. This kind of thing happened repeatedly during the conflict between St. Valen and Dahius. The Federation has no recourse against the church's shameless actions, and can only retreat repeatedly, avoiding conflict. No powerful figure in a high position wants to bear the brunt of the massacre of ordinary people. The consequences of losing public support are simply unbearable. Siege warfare is indeed a simpler and more brutal method for you, but the ammunition and supplies consumed are also a bottomless pit. As the harvest is approaching, the logistics transportation capacity in various places is already very tight. If you continue to waste so unscrupulously, even if we defeat the Border Duke, I am afraid that the spoils will not be able to make up for the losses we suffered in the battle. The war was originally provoked under the name of debt collection and revenge. In essence, it was to recover the large amount of food and property that was looted. If the final result is that the consumption is more than the benefits, then this military action will become a complete loss-making business. Naturally, the military expressed dissatisfaction with the staff's remarks, feeling that the other party's words and deeds seemed to regard them as prodigal sons who only knew how to waste supplies. The battalion commander jumped out and said angrily, "After all, isn't it just the worry about the excessive consumption of ammunition in the siege? Humph, without artillery and air support. Can't we take down the stone doghouse of a bumpkin lord? My 3rd Battalion can take on the task of siege operations and be responsible for climbing the city wall and seizing the city gate." Wayne was so angry at the words of this reckless man that he rolled his eyes. How could he increase his strength for no reason? It was simply a stupid act done out of anger. At Vaughn's repeated signaling, he quickly kicked the other party hard under the table and told him to shut up immediately. The staff officers, however, did not take it seriously. They were not afraid of the angry provocations of these ferocious officers and patiently explained, letting soldiers risk their lives in close combat to save ammunition and supplies is not putting the cart before the horse, is it, Spending a lot of time luring them out of the city they are defending to fight will also prolong the combat cycle. The cost is no less than a siege. Besides, the Border Grand Duke has several military aristocratic forces under his command. It would be time-consuming to recruit and gather them all. It would be better to launch a quick raid and go straight to the Grand Duke's lair, not giving him the opportunity and time to gather his forces, and catch him off guard. What if the other party gets wind of it in advance and retreats to their fiefdom castles and refuses to come out? We still need to clear them out one by one. Every battle is an offensive, so a direct raid on the Border Grand Duke's fiefdom capital is the most appropriate battle plan. Pierce listened calmly to the officers and staff arguing. Seeing that everyone had expressed similar opinions, he took the initiative to stand up and make the final decision. All right, I've heard all your opinions. There's no need to argue anymore. For this operation, we'll split our forces into 3 groups. The 2 flanks will be responsible for harassing the border and cutting off their intelligence transmissions, while the main force will directly attack the Border Grand Duke's fiefdom, Landing City, and strive to completely capture it within a day. Then we'll block the news and send out a fake distress signal to attract military nobles from other fiefdoms under his command to come and reinforce. Pierce believed that the combat strategy originally used against the old royal capital, Jinhu City, would be copied to overseas combat operations, and it would also have a good effect. Chapter 490 Debt Collection Operation. 2 days later, the 2,000 soldiers participating in this cross-border operation were ready to depart. The main battle force departed from the old capital, Golden Radiant City, and sailed directly downstream aboard ironclad ships to Silver Pine City. There, they split off from the flanking forces and headed straight for Bluethorn City, nestled within the border fiefdom of Barclay. Simultaneously, according to the plan laid out at the war meeting, flanking forces from Black Mountain Port and Silver Pine City entered Barclay's territory from the east and west, beginning to harass the vassal nobles of the Border Duke. Unlike the initial attack on the old capital, this large-scale military operation could no longer rely on convenient river transportation. A tributary of the Ralph River, flowing westward after Silver Pine City, immediately headed towards the Wizarding Kingdom of Daius. Once inside Barclay territory, the combat forces had to rely solely on foot. This was one of the main reasons why Harvey deployed a large number of war beasts for this operation. Whether for long-distance marches or transporting war supplies, ordinary ox-drawn carts simply couldn't handle the logistical needs of the Northern Army. The magic-powered cannons alone, weighing over 1,000 kilograms, could hardly be easily pulled by anyone but the alchemic camel beasts. Staff Officer Ivan, accompanying the main force, was surprised to see someone among the officers. Mr. Knight, why are you following us again? Dickinson, somewhat incongruously dressed in the ordinary uniform of the Northern Army, wore no insignia of rank on his dark black uniform, and carried no weapons. Standing among the lower-ranking officers, he looked a little uneasy. I applied to Commander-in-Chief, Lord Pierce, to join the campaign against the Border Duke of Barclay, but the city lord rejected my request, allowing me only to accompany the troops, but not to personally participate in the battle. Ivan smiled. The city lord and the commander don't mean to humiliate you. Even a newly enlisted soldier needs at least 3 months of training to master the use of a mono-rifle. Using mono-machine guns and mono-powered cannons requires even longer periods of coordinated practice. It's not something you can master overnight. He paused, taking in Dickinson's attire, and teased him kindly. Furthermore, the Northern Army has no knights. Aside from the special operations teams composed of bloodline warriors, we rarely have opportunities for close combat with the enemy. So the fighting style you excelled in isn't suitable for joining our forces? Dickinson remained unimpressed. He nodded. That's fine. It's great that I can accompany the army. Even if I can't personally see the front lines, I can still perform some logistical work within my capacity. Ivan was stunned for a moment and asked in confusion, why do you insist on going with the army? Wouldn't it be better to stay in the old capital and ask the city lord for a position more suitable for your status? The city lord praised you personally at the time. The chief knight shook his head and said hesitantly, after the city lord took control of the capital, he did not do as everyone expected. He was impatient to replace His Majesty the Grand Duke and ascend the throne. Instead, he exempted taxes and labor, punished the convicted nobles, stabilized the situation in the city, and even sent troops to the border to mediate the war. Now, For the sake of the people who were invaded by neighboring countries, he sent troops to attack the border Duke Barclay and recapture the food and property that were looted. He became more and more excited as he spoke, and his face flushed slightly. As the chief knight of the St. Valen capital, the responsibility of guarding the people and the country should have been borne by me and the royal knights under my command. But the royal knights are unwilling to surrender and are seeking their own death. Let me repay their debts and responsibilities on their behalf. Ivan sighed somewhat, and said in an admiring tone, although the city lord has already praised you, I still want to repeat one sentence. You are indeed a true knight. After that, he turned his head and looked around, leaned close to Dickinson's ear and whispered, want to join the Northern Army and fight to protect the country and the people? It's actually not difficult. If you are willing, I can try to recommend you to the higher-ups at the general staff. The city lord and the commander are unwilling to let you condescend to be an ordinary soldier, but joining the general staff should be no problem at all. Northern Territory, Spark City. Having just received a battle report, Harvey let out a slow breath and turned to Reiner and Asdalen in his study, saying, I hope this overseas military operation will yield enough food and supplies to last us until the harvest. As long as they could successfully overcome this month-long food shortage, not only would Spark City's East Expansion base, but even the vast, fertile farmland surrounding Fingigan City would soon be ready for harvest. While enchanted grains weren't yet common in the Southern Territory, and wheat yields and quality would be slightly lower, feeding the large number of displaced people would be no problem. Several of the Southern Territory's well-established chambers of commerce had also reported back, offering to temporarily allocate some of their winter grain reserves to St. Valen. Some would be used to feed the starving people in Black Mountain Port and Silver Pine City, who had just experienced the baptism of war. The remainder would continue north to supplement the daily food needs of Spark City, a vast, desolate city with a rapidly growing population. The ongoing foreign wars and population growth have placed immense pressure on all production departments in Xinghuo City. Amidst this turmoil, Harvey finally received some surprising news. The farmland reclaimed in early spring at the Dongshuo base is expected to yield a harvest far exceeding the original production target, reaching an unprecedented level of grain output. Whether through wheat cultivation or the intercropping of oilseed crops and cassava, this autumn they will harvest enough high-quality food to feed over 100,000 people. Refined flour, vegetable oils, and starch products will be shipped continuously from a pre-built processing plant after the harvest, then quickly transported to Xinghuo City by rail, ultimately reaching the tables of the city's residents. In addition to continued farmland reclamation, various cash crop plantings will also be implemented. A vast pasture, even larger than the Xinghuo City farm, has been opened southwest of the enclosed eastern basin. The livestock team has already brought in many young animals to begin raising them, aiming to provide the public with even better quality meat. For those who enthusiastically participated in the East Expansion project, Harvey fulfilled his original promise. Those who already obtained official residency in Spark City were rewarded with generous salary allowances and priority schooling for their children. Those who hadn't yet obtained official residency were granted ID cards as an incentive, without having to wait for a 6-month probationary period. Furthermore, to further strengthen the development of the East Expansion base, the Barren Granary, Harvey also planned to build a parallel, hundreds-mile-long paved road alongside the train line, supplementing the already saturated railway network and providing a complementary transportation infrastructure. Of course, the hundreds-mile distance between Spark City and the East Expansion base couldn't be reached by bicycle alone, and the magic scooters, once used exclusively for military operations, weren't suitable for everyday transportation. The most suitable vehicles were the war beasts, originally used as troop transports. With a simple modification, equipped with a magic power core and 4 rubber wheels, they could be directly military to civilian and transformed into civilian magic-powered trucks for hauling cargo. Chapter 491, Battle of Lanjing City. The border between Barclay and St. Valen lies amidst vast green fields and low hills. Due to the lack of rivers to irrigate farmland, few villages or towns have flourished in this area, and even bandits rarely venture into it. After nearly 4 days of marching through the wilderness, the Northern Army finally crossed this desolate borderland. In the distance, they came into sight of vast villages, farmlands, and, nestled in the valley at the foot of the mountains, a sprawling city, Bluethorn City, the fiefdom of Carlo Kaufman, Grand Duke of Barclay. This city within the Duchy of Barclay is second only to Maple Leaf City, the royal capital. While its population and prosperity cannot rival the royal capital, The silver mines within its borders are renowned. Rumor has it that this is the origin of the Kaufman family, the current royal family of Barclay, making it a city rich in resources. Pierce ordered his troops to halt in a densely forested hillside 5 or 6 miles from Bluebriar City. He himself led his scouts to a higher point, observing carefully through a telescope. Notify the general staff that diplomatic documents may now be sent to Duke Carlo, according to the previous battle plan, quietly crossing the border and directly approaching Bluebriar City, rashly launching a surprise attack on a neighboring great lord, would easily embroil St. Valen in the north in a whirlpool of diplomatic controversy. After all, civil war in a duchy is different from a formal war with a neighboring nation. Even in cases like the border strife between Dallas and St. Valen, neither country formally declared war, fearing an irreversible all-out conflict. Harvey's calculations were similar. As a spellcaster, ruling a secular kingdom was inherently sensitive. If he didn't want to force the southern kingdoms into siding with the church, he had to at least ensure a legitimate cause. Submitting a diplomatic document accusing the enemy of unprovoked border harassment and plundering of the people was essentially a temporary formality. Everyone knew Duke Carlo wouldn't simply yield to the demands of the document, returning the looted treasure and food, and paying substantial compensation to compensate the border population for the losses incurred during the war. The enemy would likely shrug it off, and even if they were slightly more vigilant, they wouldn't immediately reinforce their city defenses or territory. The march across the border in recent days showed that this self-proclaimed Grand Duke of the border, who boasted of commanding a fortified city, seemed oblivious to the possibility of a subsequent reckoning with St. Valen. Upon his retreat, he didn't even leave behind a small cavalry scout, completely unaware that a powerful combat force was approaching right under his nose. Border Grand Duke Carlo Kaufman sat on a high seat, squinting at the clerical messenger standing at the bottom of the stairs, raised his eyebrows and smiled. The northern lord of St. Valen is really free. The situation in his own country is not even stable yet, and he's already rushing to settle accounts with the Grand Duke of my neighboring country. He stood up, patted the sword hanging at his waist provocatively, and sneered, "Go back and tell the northern lord that I was summoned by the Pope to St. Valen to rescue the believers who were expelled and persecuted by you. All my actions were in accordance with the traditional legal principle of mutual assistance among noble lords. There is nothing wrong with me." The young messenger looked sullen, as if he was suppressing his anger. Then His Excellency the Grand Duke slaughtered civilians in the border area of St. Valen, allowed his soldiers to plunder and steal large amounts of food and goods. Is this also in accordance with the traditional legal principles of the aristocracy? Grand Duke Carlo shrugged nonchalantly, saying, "To support the 2,000 elite cavalry and 3,000 mercenary infantry going off to war, I must provide them with pay and rewards, right? Besides, the knights under my command are all retainers of vassal nobles, not all of them directly loyal to me. I cannot stop them from opportunistically seeking personal gain, a fact the northern lord should understand as well as I do." As soon as he spoke, the vassal knights standing in the lord's hall chuckled. They found this neighboring lord, who had just captured the capital but had yet to ascend the throne, truly amusing. It was common for neighboring countries to exploit civil unrest in their own country and invade to extract benefits, but he solemnly sent envoys to deliver diplomatic documents, imagining that he could return the meat he had already taken. A man of magical origin, his mind truly different from that of an ordinary person, had been corrupted by magic. The envoy said in a deep voice, "In that case, Your Excellency the Duke, do you want to go to war with us again?" Faced with the provocation of a young envoy who looked like he had not even grown all his hair, Duke Carlo naturally did not take it seriously. He chuckled and said, "Haha, I'm waiting for the Lord of the Northern Territory to lead his army to Lianjing City." Seeing this, the envoy said no more. After bowing, he slightly raised the corner of his mouth, turned around with a strange expression and left the city. After a while, a middle-aged man dressed as a chief priest came up to Duke Carlo and whispered, "Your Excellency the Duke, do not underestimate this northern lord. It is rumored that he has many powerful spellcasters under his command, and they master magical weapons that are not inferior to those of the Federation." Duke Carlo curled his lips, picked up the wine glass and took a sip. "How many combat mages can a pioneer lord have? If it weren't for the support of the Federation behind the scenes, do you think Jinhu City would have fallen so easily? The feud between the Holy See and the Federation, after all, it only broke out in St. Valen. If the other party dared to let spellcasters attack the noble lords of neighboring countries, isn't he afraid that the Federation will not be able to withstand the joint attack of the southern countries?" After that, he turned around and smiled. Besides, there are also many combat priests and bloodline knights in the city. If a mage lord really came to the door, would you sit idly by? The chief priest frowned and whispered strangely, in the past, we naturally couldn't sit idly by and watch spellcasters wreak havoc on the nations. But recently, we received an order from the Holy City, ordering us to. He hadn't finished his words when a fully armored city guard knight suddenly hurried into the hall, his face filled with panic, saying, Your Excellency, we've spotted a large army approaching outside the city. The banners and emblems they're unfurling are very strange, and it's impossible to tell where they're coming from. Before the city guard knight could finish his report, another guard stumbled in from outside the door, his voice trembling. Your Excellency, there are flying magical creatures in the sky, taking off from outside the city and heading straight for the city. What? Magical creatures? Something that can fly? Is it a high-level spellcaster? Duke Carlo's heart skipped a beat. He had just driven away the Northern Lord's envoy. Could he really send high-level spellcasters to attack the next second? What about the thousands of ordinary soldiers outside the city? The chief priest said gravely, Your Excellency, please seek shelter in the castle basement immediately. If this is truly a high-level spellcaster, we will be responsible for your safety. Duke Carlo nodded, stood up surrounded by his personal guards, and hurried down to the castle basement, issuing hurried orders. Assemble my Bluethorn Knights and the city guard. Keep a close eye on the movements of the army outside the city. Release birds to call for aid from my vassal nobles. Humph. A mere 3,000 men thinking of conquering my city is unrealistic. Suddenly, a rumble of thunder rolled through the sky, accompanied by a slight tremor in the stone tiles beneath their feet. Duke Carlo paused, grasped the wall, and listened for a moment. What's that? Another rumble of thunder echoed from far away, followed by a continuous rumble of thunder. It felt like being a small boat in the vortex of a thunderstorm. Seeing this, Duke Carlo dared not stay, fearing that this was the work of some high-level spellcaster, who had come to attack him. He hurried to the entrance of the secret chamber beneath the castle and was about to turn around and instruct the chief priest to search the Duke's residence to prevent any spellcasters from sneaking in and assassinating him. But the city defense knight, who had just been ordered to leave, fell to his feet, his face bloodied and his armor shattered, in a state of panic, and cried out in awe, Your Excellency the Duke, they've breached the city gate. Chapter 492 The Weird Priest. After blasting open the Bluebriar city gates with 5 magically powered cannons, a special operations team composed of bloodline warriors quickly scaled the city walls. Using alchemical short weapons and revolvers, they effortlessly routed the hundreds of defenders stationed there. Having secured the walls, the main combat force, supported by airships, began advancing in an orderly fashion. Several high-explosive bombs pelted the Bluebriar Knights' quarters, the Duke's residence, and the Silver Forge, clearly displaying the flag of the Grand Duke of the Border, instantly engulfing them in flames. Several cavalry units surged from the narrow streets, attempting to halt the Northern Army's advance into the city. However, urban combat was clearly not their forte. The roads, barely wide enough for 5 or 6 knights charging abreast, made the ranks incredibly crowded, making them perfect targets. Just 3 or 4 volleys of rifle fire were enough to sap the fearless knights, leaving them without even a chance to swing their swords, as they fell dead in the streets. However, the piles of enemy and horse carcasses still blocked the roads to a certain extent, significantly slowing the Northern Army's advance. Pierce keenly sensed that Duke Carlo was sacrificing the lives of his knights to buy himself time to escape. Commander, we spotted a group of light cavalry leaving the city through the south gate, heading towards Maple Leaf City, the capital of the Barclay Kingdom. They didn't fly any banners or insignia, so we're not sure if they were Duke Carlo's men. Pierce waved his hand dismissively. It's probably him. He's quite self-aware. Once he realized he couldn't withstand our attack, he decisively ordered the city to abandon and flee. He's wiser than most of the foolish nobles who stubbornly resist. They had no intention of doing anything to Duke Carlo. After all, he was, a fiefdom of a neighboring nation. Conventional wisdom in warring nations meant executing nobles without cause, and capturing them alive wouldn't yield much in the way of a ransom. The main purpose of their quest was to recover the property and food supplies the Duke had left behind in his fiefdom. After taking control of the Duke's palace, seal off wall areas such as the castle's granary, underground treasury, and cavalry station where war supplies are stored. Try not to disturb the local people. We will begin confiscating the supplies after nightfall and transport them out of the city as quickly as possible. Pierce was giving orders for the next action plan when he suddenly heard a commotion coming from the front. A soldier suddenly screamed, and someone else was shouting something. "What happened?" he asked with a frown. Battalion Commander Vaughn, who had been fighting alongside the soldiers, trotted over and said breathlessly, "Commander, ahead is the cathedral built by the church in Bluethorn City. We originally planned to attack directly and arrest and drive away those priests, but those civilian believers actually blocked the doorway desperately, and put their unarmed chests under the soldiers' guns. The Northern Army has always strictly required soldiers to avoid killing civilians as much as possible during combat." Faced with such a terrible situation, most soldiers were a little at a loss. Although they still maintained strict obedience to orders and confronted the civilians on the steps in front of the church. No one dared to pull the trigger and fire the first shot to kill civilians without the commander's order. Pierce understood the situation and raised his hand, commanding, "All troops, halt your advance. Surround the church and maintain security." The soldiers immediately obeyed the order, changing their advancing formation in unison. They split into two groups, blocking the front and rear gates. A team of snipers scaled a nearby building, aiming their rifles through the church's massive windows, targeting the trapped church members. The combat priests and bloodline knights escorted Archduke Carlo out of the city. Those remaining in the cathedral are the less capable priests, along with some ordinary ascetics and priests. Pierce curled his lips, remembering Harvey's advice before departure, against the church's non-combat clergy. There was no need to resort to extreme measures, simply destroy the church's facilities and drive them away. The church was also a major moneymaker. Operating in a wealthy city like Bluethorn City for so long, it was inevitable that they had accumulated a vast fortune. While Pierce intended to let the men go, he had no intention of letting go of this enormous sum of money. "They are using the flesh and blood of ordinary civilians as shields to stop us. This is really too hypocritical and shameless. Send someone to give them an ultimatum and disperse the people from the church. I can guarantee that no priest will be harmed." Before he finished speaking, the huge door of the church suddenly opened, and several priests in pure white robes walked out. They walked past the believers who were devoutly guarding the church gate and walked leisurely towards the Northern Army. The soldiers on guard mercilessly raised their guns, aiming them at the church priest who approached them, and shouted, "Take another step forward, and we will shoot immediately." The leading priest lifted his hood, revealing his aged face and sparse gray hair. He shouted to where Pierce stood, "We seek an audience with the Supreme Commander of the Army." Pierce, however, did not intend to speak with him in close proximity. From a distance of 10 meters, he spoke loudly, "I am the commander. What do you want to say?" The elderly priest trembled and pulled out something that looked like an emblem from his bosom. He handed it to the soldier beside him and shouted, "Saint Valen, we are no longer allowed to operate openly. This is our only opportunity to contact you. We have a letter from the Holy City, written personally by His Holiness Pope Zie to your Lord." Pierce was stunned and sneered, "A letter to the city lord? How could I not know that the city lord and your pope have such a harmonious relationship, to the point of exchanging letters?" The battalion commander waiting on the side was even more merciless in his words, and began to mock unscrupulously, "What? After we defeated an entire organized Knights of Inquisition outside Jinhu City, the pope finally remembered to write to our city lord? Want to take the initiative to seek peace? How much compensation does Goris plan to pay for the war losses?" Several priests were pale, obviously suppressing their anger but not daring to flare up. Instead, the old priest in the lead was unmoved and whispered, "Please put aside the past for the time being. The letter from His Holiness the Pope involves extremely important secrets. It is a matter of great importance and cannot be missed. I came from Goris and planned to go to the northern border of St. Valen via Barclay." He paused, and added, "If you can promise to deliver the letter smoothly, we are willing to unconditionally disperse the believers blocking here, and all the property in the church can be taken away. We will not resist at all." Pierce curled his lips and raised his hand and said, "Deal. Bring me the letter." Several young priests slowly retreated, leaving the old priest hunched over. "Where's the letter?" Pierce asked, frowning, somewhat puzzled. The old priest raised a finger and pointed at himself, saying slowly, "I do believe it. This is the Pope's decree. It must not be easily disclosed to anyone other than the Northern Territory Lord himself. So, please escort me to the Northern Territory." If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 493 Slave Transport. After reaching a simple agreement with the church's priests, the devout believers gathered in the cathedral quickly gave up their resistance to the soldiers, persuaded by the priests and pastors. This brought a sigh of relief to most of the northern officers. While the soldiers were expected to obey orders strictly, the order to shoot civilians would inevitably damage morale. For an army primarily composed of civilians, this could easily sow subtle ideological risks. Vaughn led his troops into the cathedral and quickly expelled all clergy, completely emptying the vast building. Then came the harvest. As required by the mission, the cathedral, like the Duke's palace, all books, antiques, weapons, and other valuables were confiscated and shipped out of the city in boxes. In the cathedral's basement, the soldiers used alchemical bombs made from dragon flame powder to blast open the heavy stone door of the cathedral's vault, revealing a small room filled with boxes. A soldier drew his bayonet and plucked open a chest, revealing a treasure trove of golden coins. Everyone present gasped. The church is richer than Duke Carlo. A preliminary glance suggests the church's vault holds over 100,000 gold pounds. It seems that after the Duchy of Berkeley began expelling and purging church forces, they transferred all the church's wealth from the rest of the country to Bluebriar City. They haven't even had time to transport it back to the holy city of Goris, effectively allowing the Northern Army to intercept it mid-route. Pierce frowned and ordered, "Immediately notify the two flanking forces to bring their alchemical camels and quickly rendezvous with the main force at Bluebriar City." Judging by the spoils captured so far, they'd easily taken Bluebriar City. The money and supplies they'd amassed wouldn't be enough to transport back home in one round trip, not to mention the vast quantities of wheat filling the granaries. These were urgently needed supplies, and should be prioritized over the golden coins. After all, although Duke Carlo had abandoned the city and fled, he had taken most of his elite knights with him, and he still had many military nobles with fiefdoms elsewhere to rely on, so he wasn't seriously injured. If he waited until he reached his vassals' territory to regroup and return to Bluebriar City, it would undoubtedly cause great difficulties for the Northern Army's supply transportation. A quick victory, loot and run, had been the core strategy of their debt collection operation. On the third day, the Northern Army spent considerable time organizing the supplies confiscated within Bluebriar City and transporting them in batches to their bases outside the city. They had to depart for home by tomorrow morning at the latest. However, even with all their alchemical vehicles deployed, nearly a third of the supplies remained untransported. Pierce began to regret not recruiting more alchemical beasts for this operation before the expedition. While Pierce was worrying about transporting the supplies, the flanking forces led by Dave and Wayne marched through the night, utilizing the alchemical vehicle's extreme mobility to quickly rendezvous with Bluebriar City. "Commander, we passed by the silver mine in the valley not far from Bluethorn City on the way, and found that there were quite a few people living there. There was a cavalry squad of the Duke stationed there. However, the mining town had no city walls, so we easily attacked it." Duff rubbed his hands happily. "We found dozens of boxes of silver ingots in the mining area. Isn't that stuff very valuable? You can rush to join us. If you don't transport it back directly, we will send people to guard it there and can go back to support at any time." Bluethorn City has a population of less than 10,000. Most of the miners and laborers engaged in silver mining do not live in the city, but are scattered in various mines of various sizes in the valley outside the city. Instead, the population in the city seems a little sparse, even worse than a border earl city like Grizzly Castle. Pierce nodded and said in a deep voice, "Don't worry about the silver mine. We can't transport all the supplies from Langing City right now, so don't set your sights on those heavy silver ores." Wayne came over and added, "Then, what about the slaves in the mine? These people are not native to the Duchy of Berkeley. Most of them were captured from all over the place by Duke Carlo through slave traders and slave hunting teams. Among them are people from our Duchy of St. Valen. The Duchy of Berkeley is different from St. Valen. It is one of the few secular kingdoms in the central southern border that allows legal slave trade. In essence, it is because the country is rich in mineral resources. The noble lords of each fiefdom need a large amount of cheap labor to mine minerals for themselves, which makes the slave trade extremely prosperous. After you defeated the knights guarding the mining area, wouldn't they just run away in a swarm?" Wayne shook his head, his tone a little low. "The nobles didn't even shackle the slaves to prevent them from escaping, because no matter whether they were men or women, old or young, Their faces were branded with extremely obvious slave marks. If they escaped and were discovered and reported, they would only be hanged. Pierce narrowed his eyes and continued to ask, how many slaves are there in the valley mining area? The largest mine we currently control holds more than 1,000 slaves. We haven't had time to count the other small mines in the surrounding area, but the total number is estimated to be no less than 3,000. The biggest disadvantage is that there is no waterway or river transportation near Bluethorn City. If you want to transport large amounts of food and supplies back to St. Valen from land, you can only choose to walk hundreds of miles through the hilly wilderness. With the help of alchemical vehicles, it took nearly a week to cross the border to reach Silverpine City, the nearest city to St. Valen. Their current transport capacity wasn't even sufficient to carry all the supplies. If they took the slaves along, not only would their return be slowed, but they would also be highly conspicuous, potentially leading to an attack from Duke Carlo, who was regrouping his forces. No matter how formidable the Northern Army's firepower, ammunition and supplies would eventually run out. After all, they were fighting across borders far from home. If logistical support failed, even a well-equipped and well-trained professional soldier could easily be trapped by the enemy's frequent harassment tactics and ultimately run out of ammunition and food. After careful consideration, Pierce decided that he couldn't act on his own and honestly reported the situation through his magic brain. He received a swift response, which immediately lifted his already irritable spirits, though the content of the reply left him somewhat baffled. Upon hearing the news, the city lord unexpectedly ordered him to bring back all the slaves stranded in the valley's mining district. Furthermore, he also ordered the rescued slaves to share some of the food and supplies that the alchemical vehicles couldn't carry. This way, they could ensure they could take all the food without missing out on the looted money Duke Carlo and the church could plunder. A truly greedy order. But the city lord clearly anticipated the consequences of this move. The troops would be severely slowed down by the heavy supplies and large numbers of slaves, and would also face unexpected harassment from Duke Carlo's cavalry. The situation would be like marching through a swamp. Therefore, at the end of this order, Harvey left Pierce with a puzzling message: just slow down your march to ensure the safety of the supplies and the rescued slaves. He had already arranged reinforcements, so there was no need to worry about Duke Carlo's pursuit. Chapter 494 The Price of Freedom. Hick, where are we going? Are those soldiers carrying strange iron clubs going to round us up and execute us? Are they selling us to mines in other cities? I heard many mine owners in the Principality of Pharos are secretly buying slaves to replace their miners. Hick crouched down to lace up his worn leather boots, which were so worn that their toes were showing. He stood up and shook his head. Wrong direction. We're heading north. Towards the border between Barclay and St. Valen, definitely not to Pharos. Although still in his early 30s, Hick was one of the slaves who had spent the longest time in the valley mines compared to the people who subconsciously gathered around him. Because he was born there. A child of a slave is still a slave. He subconsciously raised his hand to rub the uneven scars on his face. Although the burns from the branding iron had long since healed, whenever he touched them, he could still recall the unbearable burning pain. I had assumed that, like my parents, who had died young from overwork, I would be born and die in the mines, ultimately tossed into the bottomless crevices of the mountain. Unexpectedly, a few days ago, a group of strange soldiers suddenly appeared outside the mines. Not even wearing armor, they wielded metal clubs capable of unleashing terrifying magic, and there routed over 100 guards and knights stationed there, leaving dozens of blood-soaked corpses before fleeing. To the nobles, slaves were nothing more than living, breathing property, no different in essence from cattle and horses. In his short 20-odd years, Sick had witnessed numerous internal conflicts among the nobles. The lords of neighboring fiefdoms had also invaded the mines, seizing many newly minted and smelted silver ingots. Not content with seizing them, they also abducted many young and strong slaves and sold them elsewhere within the duchy. The soldiers who had defeated the mine guards and taken direct control of the entire valley mining area likely came with the same goal. Heck hadn't anticipated the gluttony, claiming not only to carry off all the molten silver but also to take away all the slaves in the mining area. Could it be that the once renowned Duke Carlo had completely fallen? They were the first slaves to arrive in Bluethorn City with these soldiers. However, rather than being shackled and taken into the city to be sold, they were taken directly to a temporary garrison camp outside the city. A soldier, whose attire and appearance revealed no rank, began to loudly preach to them. We are the Northern Army from St. Valen. subordinate to the Northern Lord, Lord of Spark City, and the current ruler of St. Valen, Lord Harvey. A soldier held a brass trumpet and pointed to the golden emblem aloft on a flagpole. We've been dispatched to Bluethorn City to repress Duke Carlo's recent invasion of our borders. We've completed our mission and are about to return to St. Valen, the soldier painstakingly explained through the trumpet, but the slaves below were completely bewildered. They had no idea about the Northern Lord or the idea of repressing crimes. Among this lowly, illiterate crowd, only native slaves like Hick occasionally managed to learn to count, but that was primarily to assist a mine owner's foreman in counting the ore and managing the slave population, rather than dwelling on the intrigues of the upper echelons. They were more concerned with where they would be sold next, and whether they would be mistaken for soldiers from a neighboring nation and executed as a form of military exploitation. But the soldier's next words made Shike suddenly look up and widen his eyes. You don't have to worry too much. There will be two choices in front of you. The first is to release you and send you back to the mine. Duke Carlo will return to Bluethorn City soon after we leave. At that time, the nobles will naturally send troops to restation the mining area, and you can continue to repeat your previous working life. The soldier paused, raised his voice again and continued, the second choice is to follow us back to St. Valen. The slave trade is strictly prohibited in our country. The moment you set foot on the land of St. Valen, it means that you will regain your freedom and will no longer be cruelly enslaved and sold at will. The price is that you need to help us and work together to transport these supplies in the camp back to the country. We will promise your personal safety and all the food you need along the way. After that, he raised his hand and waved, and a group of soldiers who had been waiting on the side hurriedly carried several huge stew pots over. Many slaves had noticed that dozens of fires had been set up on the side of the camp, and fresh food with the fragrant wheat smell was bubbling in the stew pots. Those who wish to join us can step forward and receive a portion of oatmeal from the soldiers. Those who wish to remain will not be stopped. You may leave the camp immediately and go wherever you please. Zyke grinned, thinking, where else could a slave go? Once the mark of slavery was branded on one's face, one's fate was preordained, unless one hid in the mountains and wilderness, fighting wild beasts for food. A low hum of discussion rose from the crowd, and many turned their attention to Zyke, as if waiting for him to make the first decision, a subconscious act of trust and reliance on him. This conspicuous action also attracted the attention of the group of soldiers. A tall and burly soldier with an ugly and beastly face suddenly walked into the crowd, stood in front of Shik and said calmly, "Are you the leader of this group?" Shik felt that the other person's imposing aura was more intimidating than those foremen and guards who were just pretending to be powerful. Cold sweat instantly soaked his back. He gritted his teeth and said tremblingly, "I just helped a lot of people in the past, and they are willing to listen to my advice." The beast-headed soldier nodded and asked bluntly, "What's your choice?" Shik was silent for a while, then summoned the courage to ask, "After helping you transport supplies to St. Valen, what will you do with us? These people have no other skills to make a living besides working hard in the mines. Plus they have the slave mark. Even if we go to the neighboring country, there is no place for us to stay." The beast-headed soldier chuckled, shook his head, and explained, "Do you think that after we've used you, we'll just turn against you and abandon you? I can promise you right now. If you are willing to follow us all the way back to the northern border of St. Valen, to the city of Spark in the wasteland, I guarantee that everyone will not only have a free identity, but also a job that can support themselves. The elderly will receive medical treatment, and the children will enjoy an education. You won't have to live in a shack in the mine anymore. You can earn comfortable, warm shelter and food simply by working." Shik felt his head buzzing. After a moment of silence, he said dryly, This can't be true. Even the local nobles wouldn't use such a crude lie to trick us into working for them." Vaughn chuckled and said softly, "Yes, they only need swords and whips to make you obedient. Logically, we can use the same method. There's no need to fabricate a lie in exchange for your labor." He looked at Hick with his sharp eyes and said quietly, "Are you willing to believe it? Are you willing to believe what you think is a crude lie? Why not take a gamble? Just consider it the price you must pay for freedom." Chapter 495, Assistance from Darius. Amidst the forested plains at the border between Barclay and St. Valen, a group of elite armored knights galloped. Passing a winding stream, they dismounted for a brief rest. The leading knight's armor shone brightly, and a crimson cape hung from his back, embroidered with a blue thorn bird holding a cassia branch in its mouth, the family crest of Duke Carlo and the emblem of the Barclay royal family. "Baron Della, if we pass through this forest, We can get ahead of those St. Valen's soldiers. What should we do next? Baron Della narrowed his eyes and spoke cautiously. Those St. Valen men possess powerful magical weapons that can penetrate even heavy steel armor. Ordinary knights are simply no match for them. This was precisely why, upon Duke Carlo's escape to his vassal's territory, he immediately sought them out. Baron Della was a bloodline knight trained by the Kaufman family. Years ago, due to disagreements with his religious beliefs, he parted ways with his spellcasting royal family and joined the border duke, who also leaned towards the church. The combat capabilities of the bloodline knights were fundamentally different from those of ordinary cavalry. While they remained wary of the enemy's weaponry, as long as they avoided direct confrontation, employing roundabout tactics could still be effective. Duke Carlo had the same plan. The St. Valenians were carrying a large amount of baggage and supplies, and also had to escort a large number of slaves captured from the mines, significantly slowing the progress. Furthermore, the route back to St. Valen was through fields and dense forests, with no towns or farms along the way where they could rest and resupply. If they lost their way or ran out of supplies, they would immediately fall into chaos. Baron Della's mission was to lead 50 bloodline knights in repeated harassment, further complicating the enemy's already slow march. They would then target the already frightened slaves, causing them to riot and flee out of fear, thus scattering the St. Valenians' ranks. The cavalry could then take advantage of the chaos and strike hard to tear down the St. Valenians. Of course, Baron Della's troops were not alone. Flanking them was another equally stealthy and agile squadron of knights, led by Duke Carlo's nephew, Sir Derek. The two cavalry units alternated, harassing the St. Valen soldiers. In Duke Carlo's words, since the St. Valenians had suffered a heavy loss through their surprise attack, they would naturally retaliate in kind. The knights, resting and about to remount their horses, heard a commotion in the dense forest ahead. It sounded like some small, startled beast was scurrying. A bloodline knight decisively drew his bow from his saddle and fired an arrow into the forest. Strangely, there was no sound of impact. The arrow seemed to have shot into thin air, silently swallowed by the dense undergrowth. This was clearly abnormal. The archery knight had awakened an extremely rare talent, called sound tracking. This talent allowed him to accurately strike a target with his bow and arrow simply by sensing its sound within a certain distance. Everyone mount, remain alert. Baron Della raised his hand and drew his sword. The energy of his bloodline surged through his body, flowing down his arm and converging directly onto his tightly grasped longsword. A silver glint shone on the blade. That was his bloodline talent, sharpness. At this moment, the cavalry on duty suddenly shouted, "No! There's a magical reaction in the forest. It's a spellcaster." Before he could finish his words, dozens of fist-sized rocks suddenly erupted from the bushes. The knights standing nearby, unable to react, instinctively raised their swords to strike the flying rocks. Naturally, the terrifying impact of the rocks shattered their swords, and they were thrown from their horses. Baron Della was furious. He reined in his frightened horse and shouted, "Get out! Damn wizard!" In response, a larger slab of rock flew out of the dense forest and slammed down on the Baron. Baron Della didn't dare to swing his sword to block it. He could only awkwardly leap from his horse and tumble to the side. His beloved warhorse had no time to dodge and was slammed to the ground. A large dent was made in the armor on the horse's chest and abdomen. Blood trickled from the cracks in the armor. The horse whinnied only twice before dying. More rocks and slabs of rock flew out, and in an instant, two more knights who hadn't been able to dodge were hit. Their armor shattered and they fell off their horses in a bloody mess. The Blood Knight's powerful innate abilities prevented them from dying immediately, but they could only writhe and groan in pain. Amidst the chaos, Baron Della suddenly noticed something amiss. These spellcasters, lurking in the shadows, seemed to be hurling boulders at them from a single angle and area, neither appearing nor relocating. This seemed utterly illogical. A sudden thought struck him, and he immediately raised his sword and shouted, "This is a masked spell. These damned wizards can't interrupt their spellcasting while forming a formation, nor can they free their hands to defend. Dodge the boulders and charge into the dense forest. Close combat will surely defeat them." The knights' morale soared at this, and they used their agility to dodge the boulders, or, with deft control of their horses, rapidly advanced on the forest floor. Baron Della fell slightly behind, wielding his sword to cleave the dense undergrowth. Suddenly, his view opened up. Over 10 meters away, a group of black-clad soldiers stood in front of a group of brown-robed wizards, Several strange-looking alchemical devices resembling dragon flamethrowers erected in front of them. A burly officer, distinctly unhuman in appearance, suddenly broke into a sinister grin. He waved his hand and shouted, "Fire!" A torrent of gunfire echoed through the forest. Knights charging into the woods were met by the dense hail of bullets, their bodies erupting in clouds of blood as they fell like wheat being cut. When the smoke cleared, only a bloody mass of mangled corpses remained. Baron Della had narrowly avoided being directly hit by the hail of bullets. Two of his personal guardsmen, at the crucial moment, tackled him and pinned him down. However, his left leg was pierced by armor fragments flying from nowhere, severing half the knee. With difficulty, he pushed aside the shattered bodies and struggled to his feet, leaning on his sword. His eyes glared bloodshot at the beast-faced officer, clearly sensing the same bloodline power surging within him. He, too, was a bloodline knight. The Baron opened his mouth and said in a hoarse voice, "How did you find our trace?" The beast-faced officer grinned and pointed his finger at the sky, but Baron Della shook his head violently and said, "Impossible. Your flying vehicle has never appeared." The officer curled his lips and said disdainfully, "Do you know what optical camouflage is? That can easily deceive your eyes." Baron Della was stunned for a moment, smiled bitterly and said, "Can I ask you to do it yourself? I don't want to die at the hands of ordinary mortals." Vaughn nodded and signaled the soldiers to put down the guns aimed at each other, but the Baron seized the opportunity, took out an alchemical firework from his arms, and threw it into the sky. The firework whooshed out and exploded a dazzling red light in the sky. "You are about to die, yet you still try to send a signal for help." Vaughn was a little confused. "We can continue to hold on here. Your signal for help will only lure the reinforcements into a trap." Baron Della shook his head and said, "No, I am sending them a signal to leave immediately. In order to ambush our team, you should have transferred all the spellcasters and bloodline knights from the main force, right? My flank cavalry will immediately attack your transport team upon receiving the signal. I hope that when you rush back later, those mind slaves will not all escape." Vaughn tilted his head, and the soldier who received the instruction suddenly threw a bloody head in front of Earl Della. "Is this guy named Sir Derek your flank cavalry?" Chapter 496 Return with a full load. Duke Carlo's cavalry harassment tactics were actually completely undetectable by the Northern Army's airships. The 3 airships they had brought with them on this operation had already exhausted their liquid mana during the attack on Bluethorn City. Without any supplies, they were unable to take off again and were simply dismantled and transported back home by the engineers. It was actually the Mage warband from Daius, the very reinforcements the city lord had personally promised Pierce, that had discovered the 2 bloodline knight squads. However, they had never imagined that the reinforcements would be battle mages from the Federation. Using a swarm spell called Earth Listening, they accurately detected the movements of the 2 bloodline knight squads. Without hesitation, Pierce dispatched 2 special operations teams, also composed of bloodline warriors, armed with heavy weaponry to defeat them one by one. This group of earth elemental spellcasters excelled at group spellcasting through linked magic circles. Although they were all low to mid-level spellcasters with minimal individual combat capabilities, with the support and protection of the Northern Army, they could unscrupulously exploit the terrain to launch magical surprise attacks on the enemy. "It's an honor to fight alongside you," the leader of the Mage team, a woman roughly the same age as the astrologer, with long, flowing crimson hair and a rather soft and beautiful appearance, offered Vaughn a handshake, causing the honest half-orc to blush with embarrassment. It's an honor to fight with the spellcasters of the Federation." Vaughn scratched his head and added in a low voice, "I never thought that it would be spellcasters coming to reinforce us." The female mage chuckled and tilted her head in confusion. "As a blood warrior, if you are not from the church, your bloodline ancestor should also be a spellcaster. Have you never acted with combat mages?" Vaughn shook his head and explained, "In the north, spellcasters rarely participate in combat missions. They prefer to conduct magic research in laboratories or work with technicians in workshops to create some novel magical creations." "Oh? The rumors are true?" Under the command of the Mage Lord in the north, all spellcasters like to live and work with mortals, even the content of spell experiments and research. Vaughn nodded honestly. These deeds were not a secret in Spark City. Since the rumors could reach the other party's ears, it meant that at least in the spellcasting world, it was already known to everyone. The female mage chatted with him for a few more moments, then, after the soldiers had mostly cleared the battlefield, she saluted and said, "Our mission is accomplished. We will not be returning with you to join the main force. Farewell." Vaughn's heart sank, and he quickly said, "Farewell. Mom, my name is Vaughn. May I ask?" The earthen mages gradually disappeared into the dense forest. The female mage, who had fallen behind, turned and smiled. "You may call me Rock." Harvey sat in his office in the castle, carefully reading the operational report transmitted from the magic brain instrument. This campaign against the neighboring border lord had been full of twists and turns. The pre-deployment miscalculation of the loot had resulted in a serious shortage of pre-planned logistical transportation capacity. After unexpectedly receiving a large number of slaves from the mines, they barely managed to carry all their supplies back home with only manual labor. The downside was that their once rapid march was severely slowed. If Harvey hadn't previously requested assistance from the Union's Mage warband stationed in Danius, they would likely have been unable to successfully cross the border for a long time due to the frequent harassment from the Bloodline Knights dispatched by Duke Carlo. Once their ammunition and supplies ran out and they didn't receive timely reinforcements, the already anxious slaves would undoubtedly be the first to flee. The resulting unrest would inevitably trigger a series of negative chain reactions, and the eager Duke Carlo would surely not miss the opportunity, potentially inflicting a significant setback on the undefeated Northern Army. This truly foreign military operation also served as a stark reminder to Harvey: never rashly commit large forces to areas where logistical support is inadequate. Going forward, he must adhere to the unwavering principle of advancing wherever supply lines extend. Of course, this narrowly avoided debt collection mission did indeed alleviate the urgent shortage of food and other supplies. The money and silver ingots seized from Duke Carlo alone were enough to cover Harvey's exorbitant wheat purchase bills from several major southern guilds. The confiscated grain, originally loaded from Black Mountain Port in Silver Pine City, was naturally rerouted and properly distributed by the newly established local municipal government to the suffering local population, preventing them from suffering the bitter pain of starvation during the upcoming harvest season. Furthermore, Harvey faced a new sweet trouble. Approximately 3,000 mining slaves, completely unplanned, were currently embarking on ships from Silver Pine City, heading north with a portion of the Northern Army. They would arrive in Spark City within 2 weeks at most. At that time, this 3,000-strong slave army would join the several exodus of refugees from the wastelands led by Duncan, the largest population increase in Starfire City's history, coinciding with the Harvest Festival. Harvey felt a throbbing in his temples and a wave of dizziness just thinking about it. The sheer complexity of the issues involved was immense. The already overloaded City Hall would likely be devastated. Food supply, housing, free medical care, public security, all would face immense challenges. At this thought, an idea flashed through Harvey's mind. He stood up, walked over to the magic brain, logged into his agent account, and then joined Forest Hard and Frost Giant, two of the original founding members, Elven and Dwarven, in a private chat room. "Kilthuzid, I'm sure you've heard about Starfire City's upcoming partnership with the Union to establish a new union in the north. Heart of the Forest." Although they didn't discuss this matter publicly at the exchange meeting, it's already known to everyone in the forum. Frost Giant: "Yes, I knew it. Mr. Kilthuzid won't forget us, the independent members who firmly stand on the side of the forum. Humph, those who are keen on forming a group and excluding others are truly despicable. Kilthuzid, after all, the new Union of the North was built on the foundation of the forum, and the knowledge shared also originated from the forum. After tasting the benefits of things like the Lance of Oblivion, the Union naturally subconsciously doesn't want to share it with members of other factions and groups. This is also normal. Kilthuzid, but if I can guarantee that those two young elves and dwarves who were sent to Spark City can hold important positions and posts in the new Union of the North in the future, what are your intentions?" Heart of the Forest Frost Giant: "Mr. Kilthuzid, what is the price?" Kilthuzid: "I will borrow the inherited secret treasures of both races, the Golden Tree Heart and the Earth Crystal Core, and, using the methods described in the ancient texts of the Union, create a lifestone that will allow the rapid growth of countless plants." The codes for the Heart of the Forest and the Frost Giant suddenly flash fiercely, indicating that they seem to be communicating rapidly and individually. After a long pause, a clear message was sent simultaneously: "Deal." Chapter 497 Letter from the Holy City. "Speak your name." A rough hand reached for the old priest's forehead and peeled back the cotton covering his eyes. The sudden burst of light made him sway uncomfortably. He squinted for a long moment before whispering, Theron Garrett." The priest looked up. In the grand castle hall, a high-backed chair atop several steps held a young man with black hair and dark eyes. Judging from his appearance, he looked barely 20. Was he, the Lord of the North? The young man suddenly spoke, his voice surprisingly low and gentle, unlike the cold and hard voices of other spellcasters. Priest Garrett, I hear you have a message from the Pope that you wish to convey to me personally. From the moment Garrett was brought from Barclay to the old capital of Gold and Radiant City, he had been closely monitored by two bloodline warriors the moment he stepped aboard the ironclad ship. Upon reaching the border of Grizzly territory, he was blindfolded. While he could clearly sense several different modes of transportation along the way, they clearly weren't carriages. Even now, he still couldn't fathom how he had swiftly crossed the towering Divine Spine Mountains and reached the wasteland in less than a day. Forgive my impertinence, Your Excellency. The Pope's message must be heard in person. His implication was that the guards currently lingering in the castle hall, watching him closely, were to be cleared out, not even a single servant allowed to remain. Tao, the deputy captain of the guards, frowned upon hearing this, his face, distorted by scars from the fire, flaring with anger. Old charlatan, if you dare make such an impertinent request again, disrespecting the city lord, I will slap you down. Captain Tommy narrowed his eyes, and though he didn't speak, the threat in his gaze was clear. Garrett, unfazed, stood in the center of the hall, his sleeves gathered together, eyes closed. If your excellency cannot accept this, you may execute me now. Harvey chuckled and waved his hand. All of you, please withdraw, your excellency. This damned charlatan. Harvey shook his head and said sternly, before he came to see me, he was thoroughly examined by Arturo and other spellcasters. Not even the most basic divine power fluctuations are present in his body. He is a completely ordinary person. The guards then gave up, bowed, and gradually left the hall. Okay, now you can convey the Pope's message. Garrett took a long breath and said in a deep voice, His Holiness the Pope asked me to ask your lordship, what do you think of those mortals? Does this have anything to do with the conflict between spellcasters and the church? Harvey frowned and asked in confusion. Mortals are small, short-lived, ignorant and foolish. They are busy all their lives but don't know where they come from or where they are going, Garrett said slowly to himself. Similarly, as servants of God, or spellcasters like you who pursue truth and wisdom, we are also equally confused and ignorant. Most people can never know the truth of the world even if they work hard all their lives. Harvey tapped the back of the chair with his fingers and said impatiently, What exactly do you want to say? Or what message does the Pope want to convey to me? Your Holiness has received divine revelation and prayer. In the near future, the tribes in the south will face an invasion by alien races that are more powerful and terrifying than the demons. The other side will sweep south with the power of the entire tribe. The tribes in the south, which are already divided and fighting each other, will have no power to resist. Garrett revealed the most important contents of the oral instruction in one breath, then looked up at Harvey who was sitting at the top, trying to see the expected fear, confusion and panic in his expression. Unfortunately, he was disappointed. The other man's expression was unusually calm, only a slight frown betraying his deep thought. After a long pause, Harvey slowly spoke, I want to know how the Pope learned this news. Don't tell me about divine revelation. At least in my several encounters with you, I've never personally witnessed a manifestation of your deity. Garrett took a deep breath, unperturbed by Harvey's sarcasm. He spoke hurriedly. The church was founded to unite the various races of the Southern Territory through the power of faith, to jointly fight against the powerful alien races that seek to destroy us. If it weren't for the sudden rise of the spellcasters, we would have had more time to prepare for the impending disaster. This made Harvey laugh. You say the church intends to unite the various races of the Southern Territory, and I agree with that. But your claim that the rise of the spellcasters has hindered you is pure nonsense. He stood up, walked down the stairs, and stood before Garrett. You rely on the secret blood summoning technique obtained from the demons to transform and cultivate extraordinary bloodline knights, and rely on magic stolen from ancient wizards, then modified and claimed to be divine arts bestowed by the gods? With all due respect, in fact, you have already been defeated by me many times. Harvey paused, then continued bluntly, so I don't believe that the church is capable of dominating the situation in the Southern Territory, and I don't think you can successfully lead the various tribes in the Southern Territory to resist the alien enemies. Garrett, oppressed by the other party's terrifying momentum, unconsciously looked away again and lowered his head, whispering, Yes, even if the Federation is not to be feared, we should not underestimate you. This is the wrong choice we made. He gasped twice as if drowning, and after a moment's pause, he continued, Having learned from all previous lessons, we believe that it is necessary to form an alliance and cooperate with you. Please put aside all past conflicts and disputes for the sake of our race's continuation." After Garrett finished speaking, he stretched out his right hand and opened his palm. A strange emblem shining with golden light suddenly appeared in the empty palm. "If you are willing to accept it, you can sign a secret covenant with me. After that, I will tell you all the ancient historical secrets about the alien invasion, and you will truly see how powerful and terrifying the enemies our race will face in the future." Before he finished speaking, Harvey suddenly couldn't help laughing. "You don't believe it? Or do you doubt the sincerity of the church's efforts?" Garrett clasped his palms together and said sincerely, "This is not a trap set for you. You know very well that I am merely a chief priest, devoid of any divine power. As a secret minister to the Pope, I participate in no other affairs besides recording and transmitting the ancient secrets of the church. The open and covert struggles between the various factions within the church have no influence on my position." At this moment, a towering alchemical avatar, which had been standing quietly beside Harvey's throne, suddenly lit up with two flickering dark red soul flames in its previously dark metal eye sockets, and a deep, magnetic voice emanated from it. "My lord, he doesn't seem to be lying, a living alchemical creation." Garrett subconsciously took 2 steps back, turning to look at Harvey in disbelief. "Don't be afraid. He means you no harm." Harvey suppressed a smile and slowly explained, "I just don't think it's necessary. After all, the intelligence I possess about our alien enemies is probably far more than what you know from ancient texts and generations of tradition." Chapter 498, Be Frank. Garrett refused to be blindfolded again. Instead, at Harvey's invitation, he followed him from the castle hall down into the underground chamber, into the laboratory rumored to be of paramount importance to spellcasters. A neatly cut and flattened piece of rough leather lay on a metal table. A laboratory cart nearby was stacked with various potion bottles and jars. A man in a light, short robe busied himself with work. An alchemist, but not in the standard robes of the questing society. He seemed to be the personal alchemist of the Northern Lord. Could it be that their powerful magical weapons were forged in this very laboratory by this unassuming alchemist? Garrett stared at him calmly for a few more moments, memorizing his features. "Priest, what do you think this piece of leather looks like?" Harvey asked softly, pointing to the odd object on the table. Garrett came to his senses, lowered his head, and examined it carefully for a moment, then mused, "Although it's cut into a humanoid shape, I'm 100% certain it's not human skin, nor even the height of a humanoid creature like a dwarf or elf. It must have come from some magical creature. I presume it's used in rituals related to some primitive deity." Harvey curled his lips, certain the church knew nothing about the true state of the demon lizardman. He tilted his head and signaled to his guards, who immediately understood and moved to a corner. They lifted the tarpaulin covering a large glass jar, revealing the true form of the demon lizardman frozen within. "By the Lord! What is this?" Garrett muttered in disbelief, stumbling over to the jar and pressing his face against the glass wall, his eyes wide open as he stared at the demon lizardman frozen within. Harvey keenly noticed that his face was clearly filled with shock, but not a trace of fear. He coughed lightly, stepped forward, and whispered, "This is what you call a powerful alien enemy. The intelligent creatures we named the demon lizardmen after they were captured. Have they appeared in the southern border?" Harvey shook his head and said frankly, "Traces were found deep in the wasteland. The population size is unknown, but right now, there should only be a small number of pioneers active." Garrett struggled to tear his eyes away from the frozen demon lizardman and muttered hoarsely, "How could it be in the wasteland? The secret book of divine revelation clearly predicted that disaster will originate from the deep sea." Harvey chuckled and said, "It seems that because your historical heritage is too secretive and deliberately concealed, a lot of key information has been lost. In fact, deep in the northern wasteland, there is also a vast icy sea that is no less vast than the southern seas." The old priest took a breath and whispered, "In the past, we have sent people to explore the north of the wasteland many times, but apart from the scattered evil orc tribes and scattered demon settlements, we have found nothing. Is it because we didn't go far enough?" Harvey shrugged and did not choose to take the initiative to tell the specific location of the frozen sea. Instead, he changed the subject and said, "Now you should understand why I don't need to consider the issues of keeping secrets and forming alliances." Garrett lowered his eyes and said dejectedly, "Indeed, I was too blindly believing and arrogant." He paused, raised his hands and crossed them on his chest, bowed slightly and made a strange salute to Harvey. Before I came, His Majesty told me, if the Lord of the North chooses to ally with the Church, then we will do our best to help you replace the Federation's supreme status and influence in the spellcasting world. Harvey was a little surprised. What if I refuse to ally? The old priest lowered his head and said in a firm tone, if you refuse, His Holiness the Pope urges you to send troops to Goris and directly occupy the Holy City. What? The Pope asked us to send troops to wipe out his lair. Reiner was extremely shocked, and his tone became emotional. There are only two possibilities, a trap or the Pope is crazy. As Dallin pondered for a moment and cautiously speculated, perhaps there is another possibility. The Pope has lost absolute control of the Holy City and become a puppet in name only. Harvey nodded in agreement. This speculation is extremely likely. In fact, there have been rumors in the spellcasting community that the Holy See has been dominated by the Divine Punishment faction, which advocates witch hunting. In recent years, that wouldn't be to invite a wolf into the house and use the power of spellcasters to help them win the internal struggle. I suspect the one who conveyed the alliance signal to the Lord City Lord is probably not the Zie we are familiar with. Arturo's family and the Church have been competing wits and courage for generations. Compared to others, he understands some of the Church's secrets and traditions better. Seeing the puzzled expressions on everyone's faces, he continued to explain, in the past, our understanding of the Holy See was limited to the fact that each pope was regarded as the human incarnation of God. After ascending the throne, the new pope's origin and name would be directly erased from all records, and he would be directly referred to by his reign title. As Dallin nodded and said, yes, in the era when I lived in the past, the pope was called Zi. Reiner muttered, that was 300 or 400 years ago. Even if there were 12 generations in between, their lifespans were too long. It's impossible that every pope has the blood of the elves who are famous for their longevity, right? Igno rolled his eyes and complained, absolutely impossible. The elves believe in the primitive gods who are the incarnation of nature. It is impossible for them to convert to the god of light, let alone join the Holy See. Harvey shook his head and sighed. It's a pity that after conveying the Pope's oral instructions, the priest Garrick told me that due to his special identity as a secret praying person, he would enter a state of absolute silence, and never communicate with me again. Otherwise, I could find a way to find out what this shocking request made by the Pope means. There is no use thinking too much. Harvey has more important things to consider right now. The question of whether to be an enemy or a friend of the Church can be put aside for now, and he can think about it in depth after he is done. The crisis within St. Valen has now been resolved, freeing him from concerns that the unrest in the central south would affect the expansion of his sphere of influence. The IC exploration base is also nearly complete, a permanent outpost firmly anchored on the front lines of alien invasion, somewhat alleviating Harvey's anxiety about an unknown enemy. The most pressing task now is to absorb the recent surge in foreign migration, while simultaneously increasing production and development to fully prepare for the enemy's retaliation. St. Valen has already reached its capacity for migration and absorption, and further forcibly requisitioning those unwilling to leave their homeland to migrate northward is not an optimal option. Therefore, Harvey immediately turned his attention to the idea of population plundering, targeting neighboring countries. Sir, the population of Spark City and its surrounding areas is currently approaching 80,000. Looking around, the southern kingdoms have never seen a city of this size and population. Just being able to sustain this population is a miracle. If we continue to expand without limits, I'm worried the city will spiral out of control. Since the Church has offered us this olive branch, it will inevitably make some concessions over a long period of time, Harvey said gravely. This will also directly lead to changes in the political situation in the southern border, leading to frequent conflicts and wars between nobles and royal families. This presents us with an opportunity to absorb this rapid population expansion. From the perspective of a city and a territory, unchecked population growth does indeed cause many problems, but if we shift our perspective and view it as a country with a highly concentrated population, everything becomes more logical. Therefore, Harvey felt it was time to change his status and officially declare himself the supreme ruler of Spark City and the Principality of St. Valen. This way, he could legitimately join the power struggle among the secular nobles, becoming a great white shark who dominates everything. Chapter 499, Guns and Cannons Diplomacy. The next morning, Reiner found several high-ranking officials from Spark City, including Dallin, and went to Harvey's castle to request an audience. Harvey, who had been preparing to inspect the naval training base by the Glacier River, was forced to hold back and attend the lengthy government meeting with apathy. Reiner pulled out a letter with the seal of the Barclay royal family from the folder, stood up and handed it to Harvey. This letter is from the Barclay royal family, written by Queen Kaufman herself, reprimanding you for ignoring the alliance of various countries, rashly sending troops to invade the territory of other countries, and abducting a large number of property and slaves from border dukes. Harvey frowned and asked in confusion, Kaufman? Queen? Is my memory confused? Isn't the current king of the Principality of Barclay Early Kaufman? Reiner and Asdalen looked at each other and smiled bitterly. This is why I asked you to attend the government meeting today. This Queen Kaufman just succeeded to the throne shortly after we withdrew our troops and returned to St. Valen. Spark City's huge and swift intelligence network can currently only fully cover the territory of St. Valen. Although its tentacles have also extended to neighboring countries, it does not have the strength to penetrate into the top leaders of other countries in a short period of time. Naturally, it cannot detect the power changes of other countries' royal families in time. This letter, which is full of diplomatic rhetoric, does not fully represent the true position of the Barclay royal family, as Dallin explained quickly. According to intelligence feedback, when Queen Kaufman was still the crown princess, she publicly expressed her preference for spellcasters. She herself did not even receive baptism by the Holy See until she came of age, and refused to go to the Holy City to be canonized by the Pope for her succession ceremony. She handled it extremely low-key. She must have been influenced by the Earth-favored one, a high-level spellcaster with royal blood. Harvey was quite satisfied with the result and nodded. In that case, send them a formal diplomatic letter to congratulate the Queen on her official coronation, but there is no need to explain too much about the recent conflict between the two countries. They are very clear about the reasons and purposes of our sending troops. Then he raised his hand and casually pointed at the thick stack of letters that Reiner had taken out one by one and placed on the table, wondering, where did these come from? Are they all diplomatic letters from neighboring countries? Reiner said sullenly, no, they are from those noble lords who have surrendered to the principality. He paused and continued to report, under the threat of the army, most of them are willing to hand over the land under their names, but the recovery of military power and titles is generally opposed. The contents of these letters are all to advise you to retain the nobles' fiefdoms and military power, and not let this ancient and glorious tradition be tarnished, defile, as Dallin sneered and said lightly, are those convicted nobles who were shot and hanged with their titles and subordinates the end they yearn for? Harvey shrugged and said indifferently, after the harvest festival, these guys who openly surrendered but secretly resisted will naturally know what choices they will face. Reiner's spirits tensed. And he hurriedly asked, do we need to send troops immediately to these nobles who are hypocritical? Harvey waved his hand and said slowly, the same, write back to them, and ask them to come to the north immediately and swear allegiance to me in person. If they don't want to, he doesn't mind sending troops to ask them in person. After a moment's hesitation, as Dallin suggested quietly, sir, the noble leading the opposition is Leon Waters, Count of Westwind. Due to the traditional marriage between the royal families of St. Valen and the Duchy of Erod, he is also the heir to the throne of Erod. Oh, Harvey exclaimed in surprise. So he is both a noble lord in our country and the heir to the royal family of the neighboring kingdom, indeed. So if we force him to come to the north, they will absolutely not accept it. They will even see this as a threat, leading to hostility between the Duchy of Erod and us. Reiner and Asdalen, clearly considering the upcoming autumn harvest and the large influx of people, preferred to avoid deploying troops abroad and opt for a peaceful solution. Harvey understood this, but rather than the complex power struggles between the royal families and nobles of the southern states, he preferred a straightforward and direct solution. When the disparity in power between the two sides was too great, the use of force was the truly effective diplomatic tool. I was just planning to intimidate. Harvey was too lazy to pretend. If Earls ever insists on taking the lead in opposing me, the Principality of Yelite will just change its heir after the autumn harvest. During this special period, all neighboring countries around St. Valen must choose to stand on our side. Whoever dares to stand out and sing a different tune will be forced to step down immediately. The diplomacy of Spark City will never be confined to the tug-of-war at the negotiation table. Under the deterrence of magic-enhanced steel guns, Harvey is a dictator who absolutely has the ability to overturn the table. As long as it is beneficial to the establishment of a united front in the South, whether it is interfering in the internal affairs of other countries, meddling in the power change of the other side's royal family, openly supporting the defection and allegiance of other countries' nobles, or directly sending troops to occupy, bringing its territory and people under the control of the country are all means that can be used. We understand, as Dallin said with a hint of regret. Reiner and I will convey your message clearly to Count Zephyr and those dissenting nobles. He paused, his mood instantly brightening. My lord, your official coronation as King of Spark City and St. Valen should be scheduled as soon as possible. The other officials have been eagerly awaiting this day. Harvey had actually considered ascending the throne many times before, but the sheer volume of pressing tasks and matters had kept him on hold until now. Intelligence gathering regarding the Lizardman invasion, the upcoming in-depth cooperation with the Federation, Spark City's new round of development and construction plans, the upcoming harvest season, the massive influx of population, the Mongol navy that had been in preparation for over 6 months, each of these required his personal involvement, providing crucial decisions and advice. In contrast, ascending the throne itself held little practical significance. It merely served to rally people and boost national morale. Of course, Harvey wasn't entirely without selfish motives. Rather than simply sharing the title of Grand Duke or King with other royal monarchs, he actually wished to go a step further. For example, Emperor. There were, of course, many considerations involved. As the supreme ruler of the North and St. Valen, Harvey was also the first ruler to openly deprive the nobility of their fiefdoms and military power. Without the constraints of the powerful military lords, he naturally had absolute power over the administration, economy, and military within his domain. This was a true dictatorship, completely different from the situation in other kingdoms. Thinking of this, Harvey couldn't help but scoff at himself. His actions could truly be described as Augustus of another world. Chapter 500, The Mark of the Slave. Snap. The young city hall official, holding a seal, stamped a deep red mark onto the card, which was half the size of a palm. All right, keep this temporary ID card. Don't lose it. If you can't find it, report it to City Hall immediately and get a replacement. Otherwise, the patrol officers will treat you as an unidentified immigrant and arrest you, or even deport you back to the south. The young official chattered nonstop, thrusting the card into the stunned Hick's hands. Turning to his colleague near the window, he smiled wryly. You have no idea how many times I've repeated this today. My wife says I've been mumbling it in my sleep these past few days. The colleague shook his aching arm in annoyance and grumbled quietly, there's nothing we can do. A sign could have solved the problem, but these new immigrants can't read. Hick, perceptive enough to hear these words, blushed slightly. He instinctively pulled the linen scarf around his neck upward, covering most of his face. A municipal official who was also in his early 20s happened to be passing by with documents under his arm. He turned his head to take a look, frowned and reminded him, Sir, it is best not to cover your face or wear a mask in the city. The patrolman from the police department will mistake you for a suspicious person and cause unnecessary trouble. He spoke in a loud voice, and the moment he spoke, he immediately attracted the attention of many people around. The official at the registration office saw him and immediately greeted him with a smile. Ah, Director Dave, are you here at the city registration office today? Deputy Director, I am the Deputy Director, and I am on a day off today. I was just passing by. Dave's face turned red, and he quickly corrected the other party's address. What's the matter with these new immigrants? Why is everyone half-masked, either with a scarf or a hood? The subordinate official looked embarrassed and hurriedly explained in a low voice, they are slaves sent from the Duchy of Barclay. Before he finished speaking, Hick had raised his hand and gently pulled off the mask, revealing a huge burn mark on the lower side of his cheek, a slave mark representing that this group of people were the private property of Duke Carlo. The others present immediately began to murmur, looking at Hick and the others with a mixture of surprise and sympathy. Most of the people in the Principality of St. Valen had never actually seen slaves, especially those whose faces were branded for life. Dave's mouth dropped open slightly as he watched the group, one by one, obey his advice, removing their scarves with bitter expressions. Even children, no more than 6 or 7, had their grimy, skinny faces branded with ugly marks. I'm so abhorrent, Dave cursed himself inwardly. No wonder his superiors always told him not to be too businesslike and formalistic. The looks these children gave him were like a whipping and a torture. Conscience pricked him for a moment before he spoke dryly. No, don't worry. Even if you reveal your scars, you won't face discrimination or unfair treatment in Spark City. I can guarantee that, but Zyke and the others didn't seem relieved. They had followed the returning army all the way north, passing through Silverpine City, Golden Glory City, Fingiton City, and grisly castle, finally arriving here aboard the miraculous mountain train. Though the army's protection had prevented them from being driven away by the people of the various cities, the naked, undisguised rejection and contempt they faced was undeniable. He didn't believe that arriving in Spark City would change anything. Although the city exuded wealth and prosperity, its wondrous magical artifacts making it a paradise on earth, their dual identities as slaves and foreigners still made them as lowly as dirt. Seeing this, Dave quickly moved to his colleague at the registration office and asked in a low voice, "What are the plans for this group of slaves, foreign immigrants? Will they be temporarily placed in the reception area outside the city? What about their future jobs? In order to avoid conflicts, they will not be mixed with domestic immigrants for the time being. They will be arranged separately in the newly built Southgate reception area," the subordinate answered honestly. "They are illiterate and have no other skills. For now, they can only be arranged in mining areas and forest farms. However, the Dongchuo base will hold a new round of recruitment in a few days. Perhaps these people will have a good future there." Dave nodded, thinking that this arrangement was reasonable, but he caught a glimpse of these people's thin and shabby clothes. Almost no one carried any luggage or packages, and many children and teenagers were even barefoot. In 2 months, winter would be here, and I'm afraid their toes would be frozen off. The people in the military who are responsible for transporting this group of immigrants are so careless. Why don't they even give them the most basic relief supplies? The subordinate quickly reached out to cover his mouth. "Keep your voice down. Don't offend those guys in the military. They don't understand any compassion or care. Their mission is to transport immigrants, and they are only responsible for transportation. They don't care about anything else." The population management department responsible for receiving this group of slaves has arranged relief supplies, but now is a special period when a large number of refugees from all over the country are pouring into the city. The entire city hall is completely overloaded. Everyone is so busy that they don't have time to rest. The procedures for applying for supplies have to go through layers of approval, so the distribution is delayed. Dave sighed, feeling a little guilty. "Forget it, I won't take a leave today. I'll go back later and take the relief application procedures in person, and get them stamped and approved by the relevant departments one by one. I can get them warm clothes and shoes as early as tomorrow." Hick hurriedly stepped forward, bent down and thanked him sincerely. "Sir, thank you for your kindness and goodwill." He paused and stammered, "Compared to the rewards of food and clothing, we would rather see where we will stay in the future. I heard from the soldiers along the way that what they gave us was a solid house built of stone." A child with a twisted and raised scar on his face asked timidly, "Respected sir, are we also being detained here? I don't want to be separated from my parents." Dave's heart tightened, and he quickly explained in a gentle voice, "First of all, I'm not a master. I'm an ordinary person like you. I'm just the deputy director of the archives department. Secondly, we won't detain you. The place we'll take you to later should be called a temporary new home." "A temporary new home?" "Yes. After you've settled in the city for a month, and if no criminal activity is recorded against you, you can exchange your temporary ID for a residence ID and become a full-fledged resident under the protection of the city lord." He then pointed at the ugly mark on the child's face and suggested uncertainly, "I've heard that the spellcasters at the medical center have such incredible skills that they can even reattach broken limbs. Once you're settled in, I'll ask around for you, to see if they have any way to remove these artificial scars." Hearing this, Zyke's eyes lit up, and he trembled with excitement. Really? End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.